Guard request has been approved, and they're obviously needing to coordinate and get this done correctly and efficiently and smartly. But I know there's been a lot of confusion, and a number of us have been on the phone trying to make sure that the Pentagon responded to that request immediately.
What's your understanding of what they're going to do?
Well, I mean, listen, you have to clear these buildings. As was reported by so many, these protesters broke in, so none of them went through metal detectors. You have no idea what kind of weapons are right now in the Capitol. And you have to clear the buildings efficiently and effectively without, hopefully, a firefight, without this descending into further violence, which no one wants. And if people really support our military, support our guards, support the law enforcement who are risking their lives right now, they should evacuate the area. Because the only place this eventually goes is the clearing of the building, and the easier that is, the less bloodshed we'll have.
Less bloodshed. We did hear some reports that shots were fired off the House floor. Did you ever feel in any personal danger?
You know, I was making my way to the Capitol. No, nothing like what, you know, some of the reports of some of my peers are going through. I was making my way to the Capitol when I started to hear the breaking of glass and, you know, what I think were flashbangs, something that was used for crowd control. You could see the crowds pushing against the barricades, and I just went back to my office, you know, sheltered in place. I have Congresswoman Andy Levin is sheltering in place with his team here in my office. So I did not feel in danger, but that is a very different situation when I see protesters who have not gone through metal detectors running through Statuary Hall and the Rotunda. And
we're seeing police officers in combat gear across the Capitol right now. Congresswoman, going forward, the votes will be counted, the election will be certified, Joe Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th. How does Congress, working with the new president, working across the aisle, try to recover from what we're seeing today?
Well, you know, first I want to say, as a Democrat who represents a Trump voting district, this is not representative of the majority of people, even who voted for President Trump. And I think it takes, unfortunately, an egregious act like this for many people to realize that you have to make a call, you have to make a decision on how you want your country to proceed. And that what we're seeing right now is not what anyone wants for the United States of America. Secondly, you have to commit, like, look at where we have come to. We cannot just kind of retreat to our separate silos, Democrats, Republicans, different parts of the country, and think that the other group doesn't exist. We have to accept that this is a fragile democracy, and if we don't work on it, it won't stay afloat. And so to me, it means we have to recommit to doing things that try and build back that connective tissue between Americans, because this is abhorrent, what we're watching.
It is essential work.
Yeah.
Congresswoman, thank you so much. We hope you stay safe as well. I want to go back to John Karl. John Karl, you're now hearing from one of the president's former chiefs of staff calling on him to do more.
Former acting chief of staff saying rather bluntly, the president's tweet is not enough. He can stop this now. He can stop this now, and he needs to do exactly that. Tell these folks to go home. That is Mick Mulvaney pointing out that now, I mean, we're coming on, you know, into the second hour of this, and the president, although he has tweeted a call for being peaceful, he has not asked these people to evacuate the Capitol. He has not asked these people to abide by the law and to leave the Capitol. And these are his supporters. These are people that he called for earlier today to march up Pennsylvania Avenue and to have their voices heard at the Capitol. And he has not, at this point, done what his acting former chief of staff has said, and what is perfectly obvious he needs to do, which is to ask these people, to demand that these people leave the Capitol building. And George, it's not just Mick Mulvaney. We're hearing from others who have worked for the president, who are strong allies of the president, calling on him to do more. Alyssa Farah, former spokesperson for the White House until just after the election, said, "Condemn this now, real Donald Trump. You are the one they will listen to for our country." He has not done that.
Scary scene unfolding on Capitol Hill right now. You see the police officers there. The National Guard have been requested. The National Guard is going to be coming in. I wanted to bring in Martha Raddatz, our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent. Martha, you and I both spoke to high officials in the military before the election, saying they would stand on the side of democracy. I don't think they even thought that this was going to be as necessary as it's turned out to be.
I don't think anybody could imagine what's going on here right now, George, and certainly the military that really did want to stay out of this. But you can believe that they will do what they can to help out in this situation. We are on the north side of the Capitol now, George. We were down by the White House earlier today. A lot of Trump supporters, very peaceful. I'm seeing a lot of the same people up here right now. And it's almost like the tables have absolutely turned. They've turned on us. They've turned on the country. There are people streaming out of here. They're leaving. But every single person I talked to here said they believed breaching the Capitol, going into the Capitol, was the right thing to do. They're saying it's our house. I can't argue with them about that. They take off after us. But right now you're seeing law enforcement over here lined up, law enforcement all the way up here, Secret Service, every type of law enforcement, and waiting for the National Guard. Now, one of the things about the D.C. National Guard is that they are not armed. They don't even have riot shields. They wanted to keep this peaceful. They wanted to have that, the feeling. We're obviously seeing Trump supporters go by and leave this area, but they are now pooling around Union Station, which is just about a block away, the train station here. And the scene down that hill is truly extraordinary. You've got vehicles all the way up. You can see some armored vehicles there trying to help out the Capitol Police and get this cleared up. But there are huge crowds. I know you can see that as well. Still huge crowds right there on the Capitol steps refusing to leave.
They are not leaving, Martha. Thank you. Shots have been fired inside the Capitol. We've seen officers with combat gear heading inside. The National Guard is heading inside. Terry Moran, this is something, and it can't be said enough, we haven't seen before in this country. We are not having a peaceful transfer of power.
That's right. That's well put, George. That great tradition from when we were an infant democracy, fragile in the truest sense of the word. We had peaceful transfers of power, first in 1800 and ever since until now. And it is a moment of profound humiliation around the world for this country. The United States of America has been the beacon of freedom and order for so many people. People fled countries where scenes like this were common. They came to this country to escape it. And now they are witnessing it at the Capitol of the United States of America. Our adversaries around the world are as happy as they can be. This is what they want the world to believe about the United States. This is what they want to happen in the United States. Our allies are depressed, horrified, even fearful, because our leadership around the world is damaged now, profoundly.
On that point, Terry, even Vladimir Putin could not have imagined that this would play out to this degree.
No. But he's a vandal. He vandalized, our elections, our social media, in order to create something that he could take advantage of. Well, here you go. This is, you're absolutely right, a victory for Vladimir Putin. And it's more than that. It's something that has been coming for a long time. We hear and say to ourselves, we could never imagine this happening here. It can't happen here. It is happening here. An attempted coup, a putsch, by a demagogic leader rallying people. His own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, calling for combat today in front of the White House. For years since he came on the national scene, Donald Trump has talked about violence, encouraging his people to beat up protesters at his rally, warning that his supporters, his biker supporters, would not be so nice if he lost, calling these people into the streets, telling them to march to the Capitol. What did he think was going to happen? This is a moment, as I say, of humiliation for the United States of America around the world.
Terry,
and it's
thank
on
you.
Trump.
Let me bring in John Cohen, former FBI official, counterterrorism official, now advising the Biden transition as well. John, you and I have spoken, texted many times over the last 4 years, talking about this broad effort by our adversaries, aided in this case by President Trump, to sow division, to sow chaos. We're seeing it play out on our streets. We're seeing it play out at the U.S. Capitol.
we've been experiencing a dramatic amount of effort by foreign countries and even people in this country to use disinformation, which they spread through social media and other online platforms. They're trying to sow division. They're trying to rip our society apart. They're trying to incite violence, and they've been successful in inciting violence. And what we are experiencing, what we are witnessing here today in the nation's capital is a direct result of that effort. As Terry was saying, Vladimir Putin, our adversaries abroad, those in this country who care little for democracy, they're laughing. They're high-fiving themselves right now because they've accomplished something that I've never seen in my 35-plus years in law enforcement and homeland security. They have disrupted our government, and they have breached the Capitol.
No trust at all right now. We're seeing chaos in the Capitol. John Cohen, thank you very much. I want to bring in Congresswoman Madeline Strickland of Washington State. Congresswoman, first of all, are you safe? Are you in a secure location? What have you seen?
Yes, George, I am in a safe location with my staff, and thank you for asking. And to all my friends and family who've been texting and trying to reach out to me, I am safe. So what we're seeing is something that is surreal. And, first and foremost, George, the election of Joe Biden is legitimate. And the process of going through the electors and certifying it was supposed to be pretty mundane, but we knew that there would be some states who were going to contest it. So we were waiting to hear the arguments. It was going to take about maybe 2 hours, and then we expected to go take a vote, and then this all broke loose. And, Donald Trump and his enablers are responsible for inciting this violence through their rhetoric. We knew this in 2016, and it's coming to light now. And it is a tragic day in the United States of America when our democracy is being undermined by a president who just doesn't know when it's time to go.
We're trying to get a variety of shots. So we're posted up all over.
Okay, Congresswoman, thanks very much. Mary Bruce, I want to bring you in on this because we're getting a disturbing report right now. We knew that shots had been fired. That had been confirmed by, among others, the Republican leader of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Now our own Sam Sweeney is reporting that a woman was shot in the neck. CPR was administered.
That is our understanding. Our team is reporting that there has been this one woman shot, that she is receiving treatment. But of course, we did hear from Leader McCarthy saying that it was his understanding that shots were also fired. This obviously is all very fluid, but we are getting just a more complete picture of the real chaos and fear inside the Capitol, inside the chamber. And George, all of this is coming, of course, as we are now seeing a growing number of Republicans demanding that the president do more, saying calls for peaceful protests, calls for calm are not enough, that the president has to come out and urge his supporters to back off. We heard Marco Rubio, who often supports the president on many issues, saying that he needs to ask those doing this to stand down, and also urging the president to send more resources, saying there is nothing patriotic about what we are seeing. Another Republican representative, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, saying that what we are witnessing, these are his words, are absolute banana republic crap in the United States, saying, Donald Trump, you need to call this off. He, of course, is also a former Marine. Leaders like McCarthy are coming out calling this un-American, unpatriotic, and shameful. But the question is, will the president go further and say, not just urge peace, but urge his supporters to back off and end this siege?
Well, something more is going to have to happen at this point. I want to go to Rachel Scott, who was, Rachel, you were on the scene as you saw this victim being wheeled out?
I did, George. It was just right over here. We saw those ambulances rush in, and within 15 minutes, they brought out a woman on a stretcher, rushed her inside. We did see blood gushing from her, did appear to have a bit of a wound there. They were trying to do CPR, and they drove her away. And I just want to talk about the perspective to give you a perspective of how things have turned here. This area right here, George, this was all blocked off earlier in the day, just a few hours ago. So for these demonstrators, for these protesters to get up to the steps of the Capitol, they had to climb over these gates right here. They had to rush past all of the D.C. police that were here, and then they had to storm up to the steps of the Capitol. They got so close that they were banging on the windows. And of course, we know that they had breached and had gone inside. It is a remarkable scene playing out here. It's tense, it's chaotic. We've actually had to move back because of some of the clashes that we have seen just behind me. We've seen FBI storm inside as well as D.C. police. But again, as you have members of Congress huddled under their desks outside here on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, you have supporters of the president chanting "Fight for Trump," chanting USA, and chanting "Do not retreat," George.
Rachel Scott, thanks very much. Mike Pence has now tweeted violence must stop and must stop now. I want to bring in Chris Christie. Chris, this has unfolded so quickly in such a scary way, in such a dangerous way, in such an un-American way. What must happen now?
George, I've been spending the last 25 minutes or so trying to get the president on the phone myself to say this to him directly. I haven't been successful yet, but I'm going to continue to try, and it's pretty simple. The president caused this protest to occur. He's the only one who can make it stop. And it's not good enough. What the vice president just said is not good enough. What the president said is not good enough. The president has to come out and tell his supporters to leave the Capitol grounds and to allow the Congress to do their business peacefully. And anything short of that is an abrogation of his responsibility. He spoke to this crowd. His son spoke to this crowd and sent them on their way. And I don't know that they anticipated this was going to be the result, but it doesn't matter whether they did or they didn't. This is the result of their words. And so now their words must put a stop to this. And it's not good enough to say follow the law, be peaceful. You must say leave the Capitol grounds and let the Congress do their work peacefully. And I think anything short of that, as I said, George, is an abrogation of his responsibility of leadership as president and as a leader of this country.
If we haven't seen it yet, why should we expect to see it now?
George, I think all we can do is to continue to say it, and I'm going to try to, as I said to you, I got out of a meeting, saw what was going on, and tried to call the president immediately, and I've tried a number of different ways to get him, and I've not gotten him yet, but I think all of us who have been leaders in this country, especially those of us who have been Republican supporters of the president, need to say it to him directly and unequivocally. And I wanted, quite frankly, George, to say it to him directly before I came on air and said it to you.
I'm sure you did.
After 20, 25 minutes of trying, I have an obligation to ABC as well. So I came on the air to say it to you, but it's not going to stop me from continuing to try to talk to the president directly.
This is just a remarkable scene unfolding now on Capitol Hill. We see these pictures of the Capitol steps overrun by those Trump supporters. They are inside the Capitol, shots fired inside the Capitol. How does the country recover from this, Chris Christie? How does your party recover from this?
Two very different questions, right, George? I think first and most importantly as to the country, I think it is the leaders of this country, both elected and non-elected, speaking out strongly against the fact that this is not acceptable, insisting that as quickly as possible, the constitutional obligations of the Congress that were supposed to happen today happen as quickly as possible and confirm Joe Biden's election as the next president of the United States. And when that happens, our country is a resilient country. We've survived much worse than this today, and the people of this country will recover. For us as a party, I think each Republican themselves is going to have to decide now whether they want to be counted or not, and what they're going to stand up and be willing to say. And I think history will long mark what you were willing to say and do today and what you were unwilling to say and do. And that's why I want to be really clear about the things that the president and the vice president have already said are absolutely insufficient. And anybody who looks at this scene, no matter whether you voted for Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or didn't vote at all, this is not what our democracy is all about. It's not what our country is all about. So as Republicans, we need to decide, are we going to stand up and speak the truth, or are we not? And I think for a lot of those members of Congress, who stood up this morning clapping during the initial proceedings in Congress, then they need to be just as loud about the fact that this is unacceptable.
And you've been clear on that since the early hours of the morning after the election. Very clear that the results had to be respected. If there are any questions about the election, they should be brought into court of law, and if they don't hold up, they should be rejected. You've been exceedingly clear on that since the election. But in some ways, this shouldn't be a surprise. The president has been telegraphing this for weeks, months, if not years. How do you reconcile the fact that it's unfolding this way, the fact that he's allowed it to unfold this way and incited it in this way with the man you've known for more than 2 decades?
I will tell you, George, that I think what I've seen, and I really divide it into pre-election and post-election. Pre-election was politics, political decisions that he was making about how he wanted to conduct the campaign, as you know. And as I've been public about, I didn't agree, and I gave him advice that was contrary to the way the campaign was being run. But those were political decisions. The way he's acted since the election is not consistent with the person that I've known over the last 20 years. And by that, I mean, Donald Trump's always been a fighter and a risk taker and all of those things. But I'd never going to be the type of person who would allow this type of thing to occur, and in fact, to encourage it to occur. He's had respect for other institutions over the course of time and been someone who was involved in politics as a supporter of lots of different candidates, myself included, and supported the things that we did and the way we conducted ourselves in office, which was nothing like this. And I really think it's been the president's inability to accept his defeat and his enabling of some really bad people around him by letting them have access to him and listening to their advice. That has contributed to it as well. That's not to let him off the hook, George. It's to say that when you're not accepting defeat in politics, there will always be bad people who will give you and let you know what you want to hear, especially when you're president of the United States. And I think that's what's happened. And that's made it even worse.
And as you said, he's not taking your phone call, at least not this afternoon. Chris Christie, thank you very much. I want to bring in Igor Bobek of Huffington Post, who was inside the Capitol as this all began to unfold. Igor, we're glad you're okay. What did you see?
Incredibly stunning and sad scene here at the Capitol. I was in the hallways of the Senate hallways, right outside the Senate chamber, while the senators were inside debating this objection to Biden's victory, and I heard a bunch of senators ran downstairs to the first floor of the Senate, where I encountered a group of protesters, unmasked protesters, standing in a standoff with one armed Capitol police officer who was unable to hold them back, and retreated back up to the second floor, right steps outside the Senate chamber, where there was sort of a mini showdown. Some kind of smoke was set off. The protesters were carrying Confederate flags. They were yelling traitors. They were going door to door, both on the right outside the Senate chamber and up in the galleries. They were asking, where are they? Where are the senators who were not present there at the time? They were evacuated. And one of them actually rappelled down into the Senate chamber, the well of the Senate chamber, and sat down on the very spot where Mike Pence was presiding over the entire Senate session just minutes before, taking a photo saying Trump should have won this election. So it's really just an incredible scene.
Slow down there, Igor. You're telling me he went from the gallery above down into the chamber itself, into the seats that we usually see the speaker and the vice president?
That's right. He was posing for a photo up on the day where the president of the Senate, vice president, would normally sit, and screaming that President Trump won this election. That's not a short drop. It's a drop of some 20 feet down from the third floor galleries where the guests usually sit, down to the floor where the senators are.
What was going through your mind as you saw that?
I don't know what to tell you, George. You would see something like this in a third world country. I'm shocked. I'm still shaking. I can't believe I'm seeing this in our country right now.
Well, we are glad you're okay, Igor. Thank you for telling us that story, a story that I would never expect to hear in this country. Thank you very much. I'm here with Tom Yamas as well. Tom, you have some more pictures from inside the chamber.
Yeah, that's right. We've been seeing so much video, but sometimes it's good to just kind of pause and look at some of the images that have unfolded over the last few hours. These come in from the Associated Press. This is inside the House gallery. You can see the look of concern on some of these members of Congress's faces right now as they duck for cover right there. This was as protesters were trying to enter the House chamber. We can go to the next photo here. You can see either the Secret Service or members of the Capitol Police here with their guns drawn. You can see their eyes are right there. They are definitely looking at the protesters on the other side of the door. They're trying to break into the gallery. And then this photo, a reverse angle. Well, actually, this one is of the House gallery as well. You can see the members here wearing masks because they were afraid of the tear gas that was going to be used. They wanted to make sure these members of the House could breathe as they were evacuating them. You can see what Capitol Police were up against here, just clearly outnumbered. The amount of people just pressing them right up against the door as well. I don't know if we have that last photo, but there was a photo here. Here we have some more House members leaving the House gallery as well, those masks in their hands. And George, there was another photo, a reverse angle, that actually had either the Secret Service or the members of the Capitol Police with their fingers on the trigger of those guns. We know that someone has been shot from some of the information we have so far. It's incredible what we're seeing. And some of the images that aren't here, but the images that I've seen over the last couple of hours that have stood out to me, these protesters have cell phones in their hands. All the president has to do is send out a tweet to say retreat. That's all he has to do. Chris Christie, Kellyanne Conway, Senator Rubio, Mick Mulvaney, they're all asking him, almost begging, you could say, to call and ask for these protesters to retreat, and he still won't do that. And also, another image that I've seen that has upset me, the Confederate flag flying on the steps of the Capitol on the same day that Georgia has elected its first black senator. This is where we are right now. And, George, you have to ask the question, and I know it's actually a question for you because you've advised presidents. President-elect Joe Biden knows he can't get in the middle of this because he will add fuel to the fire. But you could make the argument that this is his first real crisis, and it shows what he's going to be up against in his administration.
At some point, he will have to address it. There's no question about that as we see these pictures again. And I want to bring in Mary Bruce on this as well. Mary, as I was watching those pictures, I couldn't help myself because the pictures from the first days of Congress are normally so different. Republicans and Democrats on the floor together with their families, their children, and their grandchildren. Today, guns drawn.
It is almost the exact opposite tone and tenor that you normally expect. And remember, what was supposed to be happening today is normally just a ceremony. It's a bit of pomp and circumstance, the certifying of these results. And as you say, it comes at a time where normally you have a new Congress getting ready to get to work. It's a completely opposite night and day image. And I mean, it's so surreal. The fact that you are seeing these images from the floor, breaking windows, taking over the steps like that. The Confederate flag, as Tom mentions. We've seen images of protesters, and, we should point out that that's probably not the word we should be using. These anarchists climbing up the scaffolding, getting right outside what appeared to be the windows of Mitch McConnell's office, banging on those windows. The reports of some of the president's supporters going essentially door by door through the halls of the Capitol, looking for senators and lawmakers. I mean, this is just un-American, doesn't come close to describing what we are seeing here. And those calls are continuing to grow from Republicans and Democrats saying the president has got to stop this. You've seen the vice president now coming out and doing just that. Pence coming out and tweeting that the violence has to stop, that this must stop now. The vice president going further than President Trump has been willing to go so far. President Trump only calling for peace. Republicans say that's not enough. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer just issued a joint statement saying that's not enough, that the president has to urge his supporters to back off and end this immediately.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to bring in Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican of South Carolina, just elected in November. Congresswoman Mace, what a way to begin your career in the Congress. What should the president do right now?
The president needs to do something. This is not a protest. This is anarchy. It's un-American. And I thought that the Republican Party was the party of law and order. And we've got to keep America safe. We've got to support our police. I saw video earlier of our law enforcement or Capitol Police being attacked, physically attacked on the grounds of the Capitol.
This is wrong on so many levels. I'm devastated. I'm sad for our nation right now.
And how do you explain it? You got elected as a Republican in South Carolina. That is Trump country. How do you explain how so many people can be so incited to believe so many false claims to the point where they storm the Capitol? Congresswoman? Apparently, we've lost our connections, our phone calls right now. As you see the Trump banner being flown there over the Capitol at this point. Pierre Thomas, let me go to you, our Chief Justice correspondent. What more do we know about where the reinforcements are, what the National Guard is going to do?
George, the D.C. National Guard, the Virginia National Guard, 200 Virginia State troopers are being dispatched to the scene. We're also being told, in addition to the federal law enforcement officials being asked to help the Capitol Police, we're also being told that local law enforcement, Arlington County Police, Montgomery County, Maryland Police are being asked to step in. I just was on the phone a little while ago with a law enforcement official who said there are no words. And the great concern tonight, George, is as we head toward dusk, as we head toward nightfall, that once they clear the building, what are they going to do to try to get these people off the Capitol grounds? That is the issue, and the images that will spring forth from that in terms of how they handle it is what law enforcement is discussing, trying to assess now. How do they get the situation under control inside the building, but also how to clear the grounds, George? That's an incredible undertaking, and as nightfall approaches, that is the concern, George.
Pierre, it will not be lost on a lot of people who remember that day back in June when there were protesters in Lafayette Square, how quickly and with what force there was a response.
Well, I'm hearing from, people who are texting me, who are talking about how law enforcement is showing restraint today compared to what took place in Lafayette Park this summer. A lot of people are expressing questions about the privilege that some of these people are showing in terms of walking through that Capitol like they, yes, they are American citizens. Yes, it's the people's house. But there are ways and rules to do things, and people are quite frankly shocked at what they're seeing. But, George, I can tell you right now, the concern is what is to come. This is far, far from over. Law enforcement knows it, and they're now scrambling to amass enough people to, again, try to clear the Capitol. And then how do they get the grounds clear outside the Capitol? What do they do? That's the question, George.
Thank you, Pierre. Martha Raddatz, what are you hearing from your sources in the military?
I don't think it's tear gas. I think it's
George, I have not talked to military in the last little while, but what I want to tell you is right now there's some sort of gas coming over there. Again, we're on the north side of the Capitol. This whole group is by the security area, and they are shouting, "Let us in, let us in, let us in." I have been to Trump rallies before. I have been threatened before in places. This seems very real. This is out of control here. There's no law enforcement in this area, and there are truly thousands of people here who are not leaving. I think let's go back to the military there again, George. I'm sure at some point the military is going to come and help out in this situation, or the D.C. Guard or somebody, because this entire plaza is filled with Trump supporters. And I'm not sure if Trump tweeted right now, "Go home," that they would go home. They are saying over and over again, this is our house. This is our house, and we have a right to go in there. And this is far from over. We are seeing either Capitol Police or DHS with riot shields up there right now. We don't know whether it was tear gas. There was a crowd saying it was tear gas and coming towards us, and that's why we backed up. But they're now again shouting USA, 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 still trying to get into that building. The one thing that is very clear is Washington, D.C. was not prepared for this in any way. The lack of law enforcement, I mean, I'm sure law enforcement is getting together to try and figure out how to clear this, but they were not prepared for anything like this. This is a dangerous situation, and it's not going to abate very soon.
It doesn't appear that it will. And Tommy Amos, we're just learning that we have confirmed that an explosive device was discovered at the Republican National Committee.
Yeah, our investigative producers, both Jack Dotte and John Santucci, making calls on this. They have confirmed that there was a suspicious package at the RNC. They understand it to be a pipe bomb. It has since been detonated so far. Nobody was hurt in that. But it speaks to the severity and the level of security right now that we're dealing with on this day. And as Martha has said, it's chilling, George, that this was able to happen. We're going on 2-3 hours now. And, you know, these were MAGA supporters of the president. Imagine if this group had intentions to do something even worse in Capitol Hill. Clearly, they were not ready for this.
No, it appears that they were not. Okay, Tom, thanks very much. I want to go back to Cecilia Vegas. Cecilia, we were just talking to Chris Christie moments ago. He said he tried to get through to the president. His call did not go through. What more are we hearing from inside the White House? Is there anyone the president will listen to at this point?
Inside and outside the White House, George. So I'm talking to sources who are close to the president. It's not just Chris Christie who can't get through. We're talking about people who are normally in the president's inner circle, people who are close to the president inside the White House and out who cannot get through to the president. And I will tell you, the source is describing this to me as real concern right now among those who are close to President Trump about how to get through to him, how to get this message to him. There is consensus among this group of people close to the president that they strongly believe that he needs to get on television. He needs to get on television soon. They are trying to get this message to him, but that he is not taking these phone calls. They want him to, with his own voice, not over Twitter, call on these protesters to leave and to leave immediately and to condemn what it is that they are seeing right now. There's talk about calling on the cabinet. Where is the cabinet, people are saying at this point, and whether or not they need to be getting involved in this. We are hearing also from our John Santucci and Catherine Falders, who are reporting that, and I want to give you a little bit more color on what people inside the White House are saying, that people are pushing the president to do more and condemn this violence, that some staffers avoided going to work today because they were so nervous about what would happen, and that the president has been in such a rage for so many days that they didn't want to be anywhere near him. And now some sources are telling our team that they're talking about potential resignations as a result of what they're seeing take place in our city today and in our government today, because they're frankly so disgusted by what they're what they're seeing on television. But George, you know, but it is important to convey this sense of concern. You know, Donald Trump, as we've been talking about, is someone who has kept a circle, and he keeps a team of advisors around him and people that he leans on to make decisions, and that people who can't get through to him right now to convey this message to him that he is the one who can stop this, that he is the one who instigated this, and he is the one who can stop this, that the concern is growing in the top levels of the administration and in this inner circle of Donald Trump's, that they're not able to get this message to him.
Thank you, Cecilia. Terry Moran, I want to circle back to something we were discussing before in a bit of a different context with the appointment of Merrick Garland, but I want to get to the broader question of accountability. You've heard several in the last several days, particularly after that phone call where the president was asking the Secretary of State of Georgia to basically change the votes in that state. What could be done for accountability? Should the House consider, it's not practical at this point, should the House consider impeaching in the final 40 days? But what is the proper forum for accountability after seeing a situation unfold like this?
Well, that's a very important question, George. For the Congress and for the American people, look, there are 330 million of us. These people do not represent the country, but they can make a mess, and they do represent a constituency that could be inspired and encouraged by what they're seeing. And so a response is undoubtedly necessary. The problem is we have a tradition in law, confirmed, frankly, under the presidency of Donald Trump, that the president is kind of beyond the law. We like to say no president is above the law, no man or woman is above the law. But look at the history. You know, Nixon got away with it. Trump, you know, the impeachment failed. And here, if you raised impeachment, which you could even in the final days, because impeachment and removal from office can also carry the penalty of disqualification from ever holding public office, honor, or trust again under the United States. And so that is a possibility if the Congress wants to hold Donald Trump responsible for it, which he clearly is. The problem is that the presidency has really risen to such a place of power and insulation from those kinds of restraints, unlike in other countries. that Donald Trump really took advantage of it throughout his presidency, on that call to Georgia, on the call to the president of Ukraine, on the calling of people out into the streets in front of the Capitol today. And why isn't he saying anything now? Why isn't he calling on them to leave the Capitol grounds and let the Congress do its business, as Chris Christie said? Because I think he thinks there might be an opportunity here. I think that's the way he operates. And he sees, you know, maybe this is the way.
What we're seeing now, thank you, Terry, what we're seeing now are those armed police on the steps of the Capitol facing off against the protesters. John Carl, Terry Moran used the word insulated right there. And it does appear that, you know, every president of the United States ends up being in something of a bubble. It's hard to escape when you're surrounded by Secret Service, surrounded by acolytes and aides for 4 years. In this case, it's even more profound. Many wonder, does the president even believe what he's saying? Does he know the difference between true and false?
George, I was just on the phone with the president's former chief of staff, John Kelly, so I didn't fully hear your question, but he was reacting in horror to what he had seen. He told me this is as un-American as anything I have seen. And he also said this is what happens when you take the attitude of let's just let Trump be Trump, a criticism of those currently around the president, including his current chief of staff, Mark Meadows.
Okay, we're seeing President-elect Biden now addressing cameras. Let's listen in. Thank you, John.
I'm sorry, not just an inconvenience, but I'm sorry for the reason I've delayed coming out to speak to you. I initially was going to talk about the economy, but all of you have been watching what I've been watching. At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol itself. An assault on the people's representatives and the Capitol Hill police, sworn to protect them, and the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. An assault on the rule of law like few times we've ever seen it. An assault on the most sacred of American undertakings, the doing of the people's business. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much. And we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and we'll prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency. The renewal of the politics. It's about solving problems, looking out for one another, not stoking the flames of hate and chaos. As I said, America's about honor, decency, respect, tolerance. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. The certification of the Electoral College vote is supposed to be a sacred ritual, which we affirm. The purpose is to affirm the majesty of American democracy. But today's a reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile, and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good. Think what our children watching television are thinking. Think what the rest of the world is looking at. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we, the people, in search of a more perfect union, have kept our eyes on that common good. America is so much better than what we've seen today. Watching the scenes from the Capitol, I was reminded, as I prepared other speeches in the past, I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth." Went on to say, "The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless." The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor, and commitment as patriots to this nation. Notwithstanding what I saw today and we're seeing today, I remain optimistic about the incredible opportunities. There has never been anything we can't do when we do it together. And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America. There's never, ever, 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 ever been a thing we've tried to do that we've done it together. We've not been able to do it. So, President Trump, step up. May God bless America. And may God protect our troops and all those folks at the Capitol who are trying to preserve order. Thank you, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
The words of a president there from the president-elect, Joe Biden, saying America is so much better than what we're seeing today, calling on President Trump to step up and to condemn what he called a mob on the steps of the Capitol, where Joe Biden will be inaugurated in just 14 days. It was a blistering speech condemning an unprecedented assault on our democracy, saying it does not reflect a true America, saying it's an assault on the rule of law. John Carl, it's hard to imagine that Donald Trump will listen to Joe Biden, but the message was clear.
The message was clear. It was straightforward. Step up. come out and uphold your constitutional duty and call on this to stop. I just spoke to somebody close to the president who put it in starker terms, saying this is somebody who was a senior official in the Trump White House, telling me that if he were man enough, he would go up there and he would demand them to leave, demand these people to leave. But he doesn't appear to be listening to any of it. We've seen a growing number of people very close to the president say that he needs to do exactly what Joe Biden just said that he needs to do, and to come out there publicly, call on his own supporters who he directed to go to the Capitol building to now stop, turn around, and to leave.
John Carl, thank you. Mary Bruce, we've seen this balancing act from Joe Biden ever since the election. Been trying to get on with the business of the transition, prepare for the president. He wanted to come out and talk about the economy today. Instead, it called on to condemn the mob taking over the Capitol.
And taking a very presidential tone in doing so. This was a tricky line, though, he had to walk. Obviously, he doesn't want to come out and pour any more, fuel on the fire here, but coming out and in very stark terms, laying out, not just what's at stake here, but what the country is seeing. And, he made it pretty clear without saying it explicitly that he believes the president bears responsibility for this, saying that the words of a president matter, that at their best they can inspire, but at their worst they can incite. And, of course, bluntly calling on the president to come out and condemn this violence. But at the same time, you saw Joe Biden try to strike an optimistic tone at points, saying this does not represent the true America. Because, of course, Joe Biden is someone who ran for president and is promising in his administration to work to unite the country. But when you see these images, when you see what is playing out here in Washington right now, it is very clear to see that the work of uniting the country is going to be a monumental task for Joe Biden. And so he's trying to urge Americans who are seeing all of this play out to remind them that this is not the majority of Americans, and to say that if we come together, the country can still do great things going forward. That's the message that Joe Biden is trying to deliver, but it is one that certainly stands in stark contrast to these images, George.
Mary Bruce, thanks very much. We have the Republican leader of the House, Kevin McCarthy, on the phone right now. Congressman McCarthy, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you are safe. I assume you're in a secure location right now. What can you tell us about what you saw and about the shots being fired inside the Capitol?
Well, first of all, I condemn any of this. This is appalling. This is un-American. This should never happen in our nation. And whatever is going on right now needs to stop. What transpired, my office is right there by the chambers. And I watched the crowd overtake the barricade. And I cannot thank the Capitol Police enough for the job that they have to do. They broke windows. They overran the building. We had to stop our proceedings in the middle of it. And as a nation, I know we sit back and we're appalled by what we're seeing. But I want everybody to take a deep breath and understand we all have some responsibility here. I don't care what we've ever said on Facebook, what we've ever done to one another. We are all Americans. We need to stop. We can disagree with one another, but to take it to the level has gone beyond anything I've ever envisioned that was possible in this nation.
And we're seeing the images of smoke inside the Capitol building, the protesters walking freely through Statuary Hall. Congressman, the fact of the matter is that President Trump has not condemned this, has not called on the protesters to stand down. You've been a staunch ally of the president. Can you convince him to come out right now? Will you do that?
As I was stuck within my room, I called the president, explained to him what was going on. I know he put a tweet out. I begged him to go talk to the nation. Don't do it by Twitter. I know that he's doing a message right now. I called back. This has got to stop, and I know a message is supposed to come out shortly.
So you believe the president is going to be speaking about this, and when you say a message is coming shortly, what does that mean? Is some kind of a videotape message?
That's what I believe. When I was just calling back again to him, and I understand that's what was taking place right now.
And you talk about all of us taking responsibility, and that's well placed. And I think all of us have to think about and reflect on what's going on as we see this image of a mob moving through the Capitol that none of us could ever imagine in this country. What responsibility do you feel yourself as Republican leader of the House, as someone who did not recognize the election of Joe Biden, who has protested these votes?
Well, let's not put words in each other's mouth, okay? The one thing I will tell you is I believe every election should be fair and accurate. I have no problem. I still have House races that aren't determined yet. I've got a person who lost a race, a Democrat in the House, contesting it inside Congress right there. That's fair. Those are the rules. That's a possibility. But nowhere does it ever say to take this type of action. We can disagree with one another. You've been in those chambers. You know people have different agreements, but you can sit and we're all Americans first. This type of activity has got to stop, and it didn't just start today. I've watched time and again other members, I get them on both sides, that would say, you need to go confront them in their house. You need to confront them and yell at them. Look, I've had a friend shot a colleague. I've watched people protest within my house. We have a First Amendment, but this is beyond the First Amendment. People do not have right to do this. People planned within here. People, you will find later the things people brought into this. There was shooting going on that I've heard within here. This is not the America we know. This is un-America. We are the beacon of democracy. This is not our best. This is what we're supposed to show to the nation. This is my saddest day as a member of Congress. And what we have to do is take this moment to take this divide in this nation and understand we could have differences of opinion. You have the right of speech, but you do not have a right to take it to the level that I've watched people have done time and time again.
Will things change after this? Is there a way to heal this breach in our country, in the Congress?
There has to be. Look, I know the greatness of this nation. I know we are exceptional. These, at our lowest points at times, can we wake up with each other? Can we realize that what has gone on has gone too far? I can disagree with a person and still love them as a person. We can debate. What should happen here is the public should be able to be sitting in that chamber watching us debate and just think of the things that we debated in that chamber, from the 13th Amendment, from the idea of civil rights. But the idea of this transpiring today is wrong, and anybody associated with it is wrong.
That is very clear, Congressman. Thank you for saying it. Thank you for condemning what we've seen right there. And good luck healing that breach in the coming days in this new Congress. Appreciate your time right now. We have been told that, in fact, the president has released a video. We're going to be playing it as soon as we can right now. First, I want to bring in Kellyanne Conway, who, of course, has been counsel to the president for the last several years. We don't have the video yet, Kellyanne. We're hoping to have it ready to air in just a minute. What is the president saying? Is he prepared to condemn this action?
Sure. I've watched the video, George. Thanks for having me on. The president tells them to go home and go in peace. He tells them he understands that they think that the election has been stolen, but there shouldn't be violence, to go home and to go in peace. And basically, he's telling the Capitol, telling people at the Capitol what, frankly, was my message to him over an hour ago, which is tell them to get out and go home. And these are not peaceful protests. And I want to tell everyone, particularly people who support President Trump, if you condemn looting and rioting this summer, and many of us did, you need to condemn it now. What I see, the images coming out of the Capitol, people think it's appropriate and legal and funny. It's not, folks. It's none of the above. To go looting through Speaker Pelosi's office, to go screaming through the bowels of our sacred Capitol buildings. And I'm telling you, these are extremists, and in many cases, they look like anarchists rather than people who are peacefully protesting. And I think they give a bad look
weren't these people
to the president's legacy and also the 74 million people who voted for him. That's
perhaps,
not the base.
But weren't they incited by the president himself? He was speaking to that group just hours ago, around 11 o'clock this morning. He was calling on Twitter for people to come out to these protests in Washington, D.C., saying they're going to be wild.
There shouldn't be violence of any kind. Destruction is not part of democracy in its purest form. There are many ways to dissent. There are many ways to disagree. There are many ways to be upset that maybe your candidate didn't prevail. Look, I was in Georgia on Sunday and Monday. I talked about the two Senate candidates, but you had a lot of people there talking about the presidential election still. And I've been in touch with the mayor's office, Mayor Bowser. I'm glad that the president has authorized the National Guard to go. I think that's very helpful. I know that she's got a curfew going on. That will be helpful. But this is a moment for all of us to come together. And, George, I have to tell you, I hope these calls for unity are real. And I've thrown my hat into that ring as well. This, as I said about 4 years ago, that we are a country where the peaceful transition of power is incredibly important, and it's owed to each and every one of us as Americans. And I absolutely expect and hope that will take place. I'd also just like to say that when the president tells people go home and go in peace, he is directing them to leave the Capitol building now, and they ought to do it.
And we do have the video right now. So, Kellyanne, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate that. Let's show the President of the United States.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Well, the president did say go home there, but his message was wrapped in a lie. I want to bring in Chris Christie for more on that. He said the election was stolen. He said he won in a landslide. He said they're trying to take it away from you. You know that's not true. You've said it's not true. I guess this is a beginning for at least for him to say to go home. Apparently, we lost Chris Christie. I'll bring that to Terry Moran.
Well, it's a half a loaf at best. Well, one of the things that President Trump insists upon is that he not ever be considered a loser. And I think this, in some ways, is gasoline on the fire. And in some ways, he may have lost control of these people. I remember I was at the rally where the crowd chanted, send her back about Ilhan Omar. And it seemed to me as if it was a moment when the crowd took that energy out from Trump himself, and they were in control. It's possible this mob is in control. This Trumpist mob is now in control, and he can't call them back. But that was a half-hearted effort at best.
At best. Again, he did repeat that the election was stolen, repeated that falsehood that the election was stolen. Sarah Fagan, it does appear, though, that you're starting to see more Republicans speak out more strongly about what they're seeing at this point about what the president has done. We just heard Kevin McCarthy right there condemn the violence in clear terms as well, even though he disconnected it from any objections to the election. And he's right. You can have disagreements without it going into violence. For what we heard from the president enough right now, do you expect more Republicans to speak out?
I think it was not enough. I think we will hear more Republicans speak out, and I won't be surprised if Republicans condemn his statement. I actually think it wasn't enough in two regards. This was not the time to relitigate the election. He's made his views very clear. Everybody knows them. This is about diffusing a very difficult situation, and he, I don't think, did that. And he also should have done it on camera, and he should have done it live, in my view.
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
This is a very serious moment for the country.
Yeah, we'll see if he does come out with more to say. I want to go to Martha Raddatz. Thank you, Sarah. Martha, you're getting some real-time reaction from Trump supporters who've been able to seize the video, I take it, on their phones.
Real time, exactly. And I told them what the president said. They said, and as we said earlier, they're not leaving. This is beyond what Donald Trump says now. They say they have a right to be here. It's their freedom of speech. And if I say the president said everybody has to leave, they said it's our right to stay here. And in fact, George, I actually think the crowd in some cases is building, and it's a more radical part of the Trump supporters. I can see what I believe are probably the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys within the crowd and forming groups. They do have communications still in this area where the security entrance is to the Capitol. They are still demanding to be let in. If you talk to them about what happened inside the Capitol, they blame the Capitol Police for that. and they keep saying this is a peaceful protest. But once again, George, there's really, you can see Capitol Police, I believe, up there, keeping people back. There aren't as many people on the steps, but on the sides of the Capitol, on the north side of the Capitol, and walking around here. These people have no intention of leaving. George?
Okay, Martha, thanks very much. I want to bring in Josh Margolin, one of our national security correspondents. And Josh, one of the big questions we've been dealing with all day is why weren't the Capitol Police, why weren't law enforcement officials better prepared for what's unfolded?
Look, George, honestly, law enforcement has a lot to answer for here. Somebody dropped the ball because we in the civilian world, in the private sector, were well aware of online threats and chatter, as they call it, calling for violence, calling for people to show up. You know, they were saying things that I don't think we want to repeat here about the types of violence they were calling for. But this is weeks. Companies in and around the Capitol had their own intelligence operations telling them to be careful of their people, to be on guard, to take precautions. Law enforcement certainly knew that there was at least a serious threat of violence, even if they didn't necessarily know precisely what was going to go on.
And right now, what is happening now that it has gotten out of control, and we've seen some combat, some law enforcement in combat gear head into the Capitol. We've seen them deploy on parts of the Capitol step. What is the plan going forward as far as you know?
Well, obviously what's happening now, as we've been reporting, and people on our special report have seen people mobilizing, they're trying to bring in the National Guard, other agencies. But, there's a complex, situation when it comes to law enforcement at Capitol Hill. The police there, it's a small police force. They protect Capitol Hill. They are separate from the FBI, from the D.C. Metro Police. They were doing their jobs, but they were basically by themselves. And now what they're trying to do is bring in the other kinds of police, D.C. Metro, the Secret Service, the National Guard, the Federal Protective Service, that whole universe of law enforcement around the D.C. area. And, we've seen this so many times, especially with the protests and riots that broke out over the summer and in the spring. It's so much harder to put this back together after violence breaks out. Had they had a large-scale force in advance, the argument could be made that they would have been better prepared to protect Capitol Hill and to keep the protesters from breaching the building.
Thank you, Josh Margolin. Pierre Thomas, so they're just going to wait them out, perhaps?
As Josh alluded to, you've got to get the force together. They've got to get all the different agencies together, and they have to come up with a plan. And they have to come up with a plan that they can execute to try to de-escalate if they can, and then be prepared for things to go badly if they do so. This is the part that is striking to people, I'm sure, at home, as the fact that there was not a contingency plan that could be executed faster than this. I'm told they're doing it with all deliberate speed. But again, George, this is as complicated as a situation as we've had in the nation's capital in terms of the Capitol of the United States being breached, thousands of people still remaining on the outside, and mobs of people. Clearly, some of the new images that we saw, not dozens of people, but, multiple dozens of people moving throughout the Capitol. That creates any number of issues, not only in terms of removing the people. Now you have to have a situation where you search each and every office, every nook and cranny of the Capitol, to figure out if weapons or booby traps were left. Now, the hope is that most of these people were just angry and frustrated and are sauntering through the Capitol, but they cannot be certain that that's the case, George.
Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. I want to bring in Elizabeth Newman, a former official with the Department of Homeland Security. Picking up on what we were just hearing from Josh and Pierre, Elizabeth, the concern about possible actions by white supremacists and other domestic terror groups has been out there and building for the last several years.
That's right, George. They, even in the Turner Diaries, you see like one of the opening scenes of the white supremacist attempts to bring upon a civil war as an attack on the Capitol. And while what we saw today seems to be mostly organic, clearly there were threat actors in the midst of protesters willing to incite, willing to encourage people to cross lines, and some of those came prepared for a fight. And I think the concern that I have, I'm sure that is first and foremost in the law enforcement officers' minds that are on the scene, is which of these individuals that have breached the Capitol are willing to cross the line to violence. They've already crossed other legal thresholds, but we hope and pray that they don't go further at this point.
Yeah, so what will they have to do? What is the best way for this to be taken on at this point, given the fact that it's such a huge complex, and there's so many people right now on the steps and inside the building?
Well, I think multiple people have already noted that this is a massive failure on the part of the law enforcement agencies, particularly the Capitol Police, who have jurisdiction over Capitol Hill. Another day, another time, we'll do the lessons learned and make sure this never happens again. But it's really difficult now that the breach has occurred. It's going to have to be room by room, very slowly, methodically, and it will require a lot of manpower, which it sounds like they're in the process of regrouping and preparing for that. I mean, the other factor here that would help tremendously is if the president would come out and condemn what is going on and tell everybody to go back home, go back to their hotel rooms. That would help a lot. It would not disperse everybody, but it would at least dwindle some of the numbers, and it would allow law enforcement to be able to get a handle on the situation much faster if we could disperse some of the large crowds that are there.
Right. In that video, he told them to go home, but it was wrapped around his claims, his false claims that the election was stolen from him. Elizabeth Newman, thank you very much. Let me bring in John Cohen for more on this at this point. You say, as a former law enforcement official, they can't wait.
Yeah, we lost the opportunity to de-escalate this situation when the president released the statement where, as you just pointed out, he blended together this idea of going home and the fact that the election was stolen. That's why these people are here. And I would actually argue this wasn't just simply an organic, spontaneous protest. This is the result of weeks and weeks of disinformation being spread by the president, his supporters in Capitol Hill, people who support him in the media, individuals on social media. These people are reacting to the planning that took place in social media and that disinformation. So what do they need to do now? They're going to need to declare this as an unlawful assembly. They need to give people opportunity to clear the grounds peacefully. Then they need to remove people from the building. They need to clear the building. We saw videos of people going into the Capitol with large knapsacks. We've already got reports of explosive devices being located around Washington, potentially. They need to make sure there's no explosives in the Capitol. They need to clear the grounds of the Capitol, and then they need to clear the street. And they need to keep people off the streets this evening because, as Pierre pointed out, there's probably a very high likelihood that violence would continue if you have large groups of people in and around the streets of D.C. That's where law enforcement is going to be focusing now.
And that's the question. Will the crowd be diminishing or not? It appears to have been growing over the last couple of hours. John Cohen, thanks very much. Let me bring Chris Christie back. We do have him connected right now. Well, Chris, the president did come out with a statement wrapped in propaganda.
Yeah, George, listen, I think that the statement was a one step forward, two steps back attempt. The president needs to make it unequivocal that these actions by these protesters is absolutely un-American and reprehensible. And there can't be any ambiguity about that. And I think there was a lot of ambiguity in that statement. Listen, I'm glad he did at least what he did. It's better than having done nothing, but it's certainly not what should be expected of a president in this circumstance.
It's hard not to contrast the message saying we love you, you're very special to his supporters, that you're right, that the election was stolen, with what the words he had for Black Lives Matter's protesters all through this summer, calling for law and order.
Well, George, at the end of it, what you're supposed to do as an elected official in this country who takes a constitutional oath is to always remember that the office you hold is bigger than you. Your responsibility in that office is bigger than you and your own personal interests. And I think that what that video showed was that the president was still placing his personal interests ahead of the interests of the country. And that's what he's been doing for the last 8 weeks, unfortunately. And this is a result. What we're seeing on the air right now is the result of that. And that's what we need to make sure we get back to in this country, is that these offices are a temporary public trust that you hold and hold with honor. And you can never allow your personal interest to overcome the interest that you're elected to serve. And unfortunately, I think the video showed that while the president got, better than saying nothing or just tweeting what he had been tweeting before, it was nowhere near sufficient to send the right kind of message, in my view. That conduct on Capitol Hill is unacceptable. It's un-American. And it has to be renounced in those very clear terms, in addition to saying, go home. At least he said that, but you got to say more.
Chris Christie, thanks very much. I want to go to Martha Raddatz out in the streets of the Capitol. The situation escalating?
It is, George, and it looks like they're starting to clear this crowd a little bit right behind me, north side of the Capitol. We heard 3 flash bangs, which means they're trying to push these people back. They were running very briefly. This is the area, at least on our side of the Capitol, where we are, where there has been the most action. This is the area where these people are saying, let me in, let me in. We also heard some glass breaking back there. We obviously don't want to get any closer to that area, but they are starting to move out. There are areas here where some of the Trump supporters have started to leave, but
you gotta fight the establishment. Take it to the establishment.
But we have some of these people moving out. Obviously, we don't have all of them moving out, and it's pretty wild up here, George. It really is truly out of control. We have lines of Capitol police officers up there, but there's virtually no police presence here. And you're starting to get, again, like the Oath Keepers, and I walk by and they're clearly making plans about something. I asked them if they wanted to go back in, and they said they did not. But I have no idea what they're up to. I don't think law enforcement has any idea what they're up to. We have some helicopters circling overhead. But we also have a curfew here at 6 p.m. And whether they start clearing people out before then or after, there's just no telling.
Martha, we just got a flavor of what you've been dealing with all day. Have you ever felt personally in danger today?
I mean, there's definitely threatening remarks to us. I would say this is a very dangerous situation. And as you know well, George, I've been in a lot of very dangerous situations. But it is so horrible to know we are in America where this is happening, on Capitol Hill. I'm not in Baghdad. I'm not in Kabul. I'm not in a dangerous situation overseas. We are in America. And when I know some people have mentioned this today, when the rest of the world looks at us right now, it is just appalling to think about the fact that we are on Capitol Hill. It's been breached. Someone shot inside. And all of this chaos right behind me, right in front of me, everywhere I look. And certainly there are people who are threatening us. And it is very different from Trump rallies. I often said at Trump rallies, they turn around and say, we hate you, go home. But then 2 minutes later, they're shaking your hand. This time, you don't feel that vibe at all. It is, they're warning us, they're threatening us, they're telling us we're fake. That's the least of the problem. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about that building and American democracy and what this all says about that today and how out of control this is and how we were not ready for this. And they don't care what Donald Trump just said. They really don't. It is so out of control and chaotic now. I don't know what the president can do, but I think it's going to take law enforcement to get these people out here, not Donald Trump.
An assault like we have never seen in a city. You've been in war zones all over the world. Tommy, I'm picking up on what the president was saying. I think we saw an essential truth about President Trump and his approach to the office in those remarks. He began with, I feel sympathy for you, I love you, We love you. His first and foremost goal over the last 4 years, if you look at every action, every statement, is to keep that core of the core of the core base bonded to him at the cost of everything else.
Yeah, when you talk to people who have worked for President Trump, either in the private sector or now in the public sector, they will tell you the most important quality, it's not smarts, it's not how to work around a business or politics, it's loyalty. And for Donald Trump, loyalty is the most important thing. So he will never trash the people, the Americans who are doing what we never thought would happen, something we never thought we'd witness. He will never trash these people because these people are loyal to him. And that message that he put out, and Martha, you know, rightly reported, will have no effect on what we're seeing right now. The only thing that's going to change what we're seeing right now is once law enforcement, another group the president has touted over and over again, once law enforcement takes control of the situation, and as Martha said, it appears we're still hours from that right now. You could also make the argument that that message itself did more harm than good because at the beginning, as you pointed out, he starts with a lie. And that's what precipitated all this, that the election was stolen, which we know for a fact is not true, which the courts have said is not true. His message is out there. He recorded it. Will it make any difference? Martha Raddatz, who's there speaking to these demonstrators, these protesters, these anarchists, say it will not make a difference. Joe Biden, the president-elect, has spoken as well, calling on the president to do more. What's going to end this is law enforcement, and then after that, the question is, where do we go from here? And I wonder, George, if what we've seen today changes the mind of those Republican senators who were objecting to the Electoral College votes that were coming in today, that were going to be ratified today, that should have been ratified today. I wonder if this changes their sort of calculation when it comes to politics and whatever reasons they had in their head that they wanted to fight this.
Well, let me bring that to Mary Bruce. Thank you, Tom. Mary Bruce, and the members of Congress we've talked to today, the Republicans and the Democrats, there does seem to be some discomfort with what they've seen unfold today. Clear condemnation of the mob from Kevin McCarthy, but they are trying to draw a line between their actions protesting the election and what we're seeing unfold on the Capitol.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of members, especially Republicans, sort of do some twisting here as they try to put some distance between themselves and their calls to object to the results of the election and the actual work that was supposed to be getting done here today and what we are seeing actually unfold in the Capitol. But all of that messaging, of course, gets muddled when the president comes out himself and in trying to urge everyone to go home, in the same breath repeats these false claims that the election was somehow rigged. It is still very hard for those who are, supporting the president in this effort to try and distance themselves from that message somehow.
Okay, Mary Bruce, thanks very much. The mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, is now speaking. She has imposed a 6 p.m. curfew in the Capitol. Let's listen in.
Press announcement from D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. Our regularly scheduled program will resume following the...
4, 3.
Good afternoon. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. I am here at the headquarters of D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department, where we are operating our emergency command center. I'm joined by the district's chief of police, Robert Conti. I'm joined by members of my public safety team. I'm also joined by the Secretary of the Army, Mr. McCartney. This afternoon, I announced a citywide curfew for the District of Columbia beginning at 6 p.m. this evening, going until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. During the curfew, no one is allowed to be outside in public places other than essential workers, which includes credentialed media engaging in essential functions. As you can see from video images, the unlawful behavior inside the United States Capitol building. I continue to urge all Washingtonians to stay home and stay calm. And if you see something, say something. But above all, stay home. The behavior that we are witnessing is shameful, unpatriotic, and above all, it is unlawful. Anyone who has engaged in these activities, continues to engage in these activities, will be held accountable. There will be law and order, and this behavior will not be tolerated. The Metropolitan Police Department has been deployed to assist the United States Capitol Police in restoring order to the Capitol, and our Chief of Police will lead the command to clear the Capitol building and establish establish a perimeter around the Capitol. I have requested both the Virginia State Police and the Maryland State Police to deploy officers, and they have engaged immediately to deploy officers to the Metropolitan Police Department to help regain control of the United States Capitol. I have also invoked several days ago a standing mutual aid agreement with our surrounding jurisdictions, and I want to thank them for deploying. Those jurisdictions include Arlington County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, as well as Baltimore City. We want to thank them for sending their officers in, assisting us with public safety in the district, as well as the response to the United States Capitol building. Additionally, I want to acknowledge and thank the New Jersey State Police, who will also be assisting the Metropolitan Police Department. So with that, I want to turn to Chief Conte for a situational update. Secretary of the Army will make comments, and we will take brief questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Bowser. My name is Robert J. Conte III. I am the Chief of the Police of the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. As you are aware, demonstrators came to our city this morning to exercise their First Amendment rights and were largely concentrated in the area of the National Mall. Following the President's remarks, a large crowd began to march eastbound on Madison Avenue Northwest and Constitution Avenue Northwest. As the demonstrators approached the United States Capitol grounds, there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. They breached the fencing along the U.S. Capitol grounds and confronted police lines surrounding the building. MPD was requested by the United States Capitol Police to provide assistance with crowd management, and due to the violent behavior towards the police officers there and their intent on gaining access to the Capitol, a riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police to force entry into the United States Capitol building. As you are aware, they were able to gain access to the Capitol building, and I can confirm that one civilian was reported to have sustained a gunshot wound inside of the Capitol. Details of the shooting are not immediately available, and the situation remains under investigation. The Metropolitan Police Department...
There you have it from the Chief of Police. There's confirming that one person was shot inside the Capitol. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser talking about the curfew she's imposed at 6 p.m., setting up a security perimeter now around the Capitol this evening, as well as we see those protesters continuing in the Capitol. I want to talk to Congressman Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma, who's in the Rayburn House office building right now. I know you've tried to engage with some of the protesters today. What did you learn, Congressman?
Well, I wasn't so much as trying to engage with them. I was trying to keep them from getting shot. When they started breaking the glass out of the chamber, it sounded like shots were fired. Unfortunately, I've heard shots fired before, and that wasn't it. And so I was talking to them because a couple of the people got excited. If you've seen the picture, there's some, obviously Cat Police, rightfully so, had their guns drawn. And so I was telling them, guys, you're going to get shot. You're going to get killed. Is this what you really want to do? And then we just had a conversation to some degree. And there was a couple of them that was reasonable. There was a couple of them that wasn't. There was a couple of them that was just, they were antagonizers, and all they wanted to do was cause problems. And you can't reason with individuals like that. Unfortunately, this doesn't represent America and our democracy. We have a right to protest, but not like this.
Yeah, it's hard to reason once they've broken through all the barricades in the Capitol. Right. And these images coming from inside the House chamber are just stunning right now. From the talks you had with these protesters, do you have any sense of what they want to happen?
Some of the ones that were there, unfortunately, was just looking for a fight. That's what it was. Unfortunately, they were there to antagonize the crowd. That doesn't represent the rest of the crowd, but some of them were, and they antagonized them. They brought them along. But I want to tell you, the Capitol Police there, a lot of them got injured. A lot of them got injured. I went down to their triage center that was in the basement of one of our house office buildings, and I visited with each one of them. And there was numerous there, numerous. If I use the word 25, I'd be underestimating it. And all of them were cut or bruised, had been hit. And that doesn't represent a peaceful demonstration. That doesn't represent what we've seen at Trump rallies or anything else. This was a different group of people, and even I found it interesting when I was visiting with some of the Cap Police. they said that these weren't your supporters. The supporters were fine. The ones that attacked us had evil in their eyes. This was separate from the protests. Even the Capitol Police, these are the guys that were injured. These are the guys that had cuts in their face and had their nose broke and all kinds of stuff. And unfortunately, that person that came through the door, I was right there when they came through the door and when that person got shot. And it's a tragic situation that took place. But it left the officer no other choice. And now that officer, that person that got shot, their life has been forever changed. Obviously, their family's life has been forever changed. But also changes that officer that had to discharge his weapon, because if you ever discharge your weapon the first time, it changes you in some degree. And this stuff should have never happened, George. It's sickening and sad that this took place.
Well, there is no question about that, Congressman. We're glad you're safe right now. You tried to reason with them, even as you saw hate in their eyes as drive by the police. It was news to us to learn that many police officers sustained injuries right now. But, in the face of all this, what we heard from the president in the last hour is to these people, we love you, you're very special.
Well, I listen, I wake up every single morning, George, and I say, love the people, love the call. There's a lot of people that get agitated. Politicians are kind of the catch-all when people get upset. And I understand what he's saying. I love them, too. I don't hate them. I do love them, legitimately. I do love them. But there's a right way and a wrong way to go at it. And everybody that did this the wrong way, they should be punished to the full extent of the law, every one of them. And hopefully we can prosecute them, because they should be. But I still respect their ability and their rights, their constitutional rights to protest, but we don't do it this way. This isn't how we handle it.
You don't breach the Capitol. You don't seize the Capitol. Congressman, thank you very much.
Absolutely, you don't. And it's fortunate that a lot more civilians didn't get shot, because Cat Police showed a great restraint by not doing so. A great restraint. That's where professional law enforcement took place. That's why we need police around us all the time.
Congressman, thanks for your time. Stay safe there in the Capitol today. I want to bring Martha Raddatz back. The police presence around you growing?
It sure is, George. We walked about 100 yards down from the Capitol because we could see lines of police forming. You can see right behind my shoulder there, this side, that side, standing by, forming that perimeter that Mayor Bowser talked about. Again, we're on the north side here, and there are long lines of police officers here. There are long lines of police vehicles the other way, and we are just over an hour from curfew. So it seems certain that they will probably try to clear out this area at some point once we pass that curfew point. We still see people over in the security area who say they want to get inside the Capitol. They are being kept away, but they aren't leaving. Although I would say some of the crowd has cleared out, more the protester types who I was with down earlier near the White House. They've started to leave, but again, they keep saying they have the right to be here. They keep calling this a peaceful protest, although it's been far from it, George.
Okay, Martha, thanks very much. Let me bring Tony Cardenas in. Congressman Tony Cardenas from California. Where are you, sir, at this point? I know you can't say the exact location. I assume you're in a safe location. Are you still in the Capitol Hill complex?
I'm still in the Capitol complex. I feel safe at the moment, and my prayers go out to all of those officers and all those individuals who are doing everything they can to keep us safe. And I heard what my colleague said. Yes, these officers had shown tremendous and that's the respect that any individual deserves. But when somebody tries to break into the Capitol of the United States of America, that right there is an atrocity, and it's a stain on our history forevermore.
And the question is, where do we go from here at this point? Have you received any indication from leadership on what's going to be happening at the Capitol, how the Capitol is going to be cleared, whether you'll be able to get back to business?
The only thing that I could tell you, George, is that for the safety of the staff and the members to get back to the democratic process that commenced this morning in counting the ballots of the Electoral College, as we do every January 6th, every 4 years, we will resume that as soon as they can promise us that the facility is safe. As one of your callers just mentioned a little while ago, they're going to have to check every nook and cranny to make sure that none of these individuals left anything nefarious that could cause any injury, again, to the staff or the elected officials and all of us who are here to follow through with our duty.
Were you able to engage any of the protesters personally?
No, I was never that close to any of them, and but I know the Capitol Police. I thank them every day that I see them. I look into their eyes, and I know that they're men and women, husbands and wives, and again, I'm praying for them, and I know the kind of hearts that they have. They're tough, and they know how to do their job, but at the same time, they do still restrained, and I'm so glad that unfortunately that many of them have been injured. It just got reported. But I hope and pray that is at a minimum, and that we can move forward as quickly as possible with our democratic process.
Congressman Cardenas, thanks very much for your time. We're seeing video now of members of the protesters, the mob, appearing to smash media equipment right there, as you see the police looking by and perhaps lighting a fire. Rachel Scott has been on the scene during the day. What can you tell us about what you're seeing? Apparently we lost Rachel as we see the standoff there at the Capitol, but we do have Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, a member of the House leadership. A day you thought you'd never see, I'm sure, Congressman.
Without question, George, and we should pray for our nation and make sure that we never see a day like this again. The Capitol was breached. It was stormed by traitors, people engaging in treasonous and seditious behavior, incited by the President of the United States of America, and he should tell his supporters in clear and unequivocal terms to stand down and stand down immediately.
That's not what you heard from the earlier statement from the President?
The President seems incapable intellectually of communicating a clear and direct message to his so-called supporters who have breached the Capitol, injured officers, placed innocent lives at risk, and turned America into something that I thought we would never see in a democracy anchored in the principle of the rule of law. But we are going to return to the Capitol Dome as soon as it's safe. We're not going to allow mob rule to take over. We're going to complete our work. We are going to certify the results of the Electoral College. The people have spoken. The Electoral College has spoken. The courts have spoken. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States of America. He will be sworn in on January 20th.
Do you have any idea on how this is all going to unfold, when that's going to be able to happen, what the plans are to secure the Capitol?
We're following the guidance of the Capitol Police, the Sergeant at Arms, who, as I understand it, have called in additional resources to secure the Capitol. The members are being patient but anxious to return to our constitutional responsibilities. Obviously, we will follow the direction of our public safety officers, but we're committed to the principle that no one is above the law, and we have a constitutional job to do. We are going to do it. We will not abandon our post.
And going forward, as you said, Joe Biden has been elected. He will be inaugurated on those same Capitol steps in just 14 days. How does the new Congress move forward, we hope, in some way together, and to heal the wounds from what we've seen today?
Well, Joe Biden is the right man at the right time with respect to bringing our country together. Who's someone who has indicated from the very beginning, fought his election, that he's not going to be the president just for Democrats. He's going to be the president for Democrats, independents, and Republicans, for those who voted for him, those who voted against him. And he's got the experience, the credibility, the authenticity, and the intellect to do it. But I'll also say, George, that there has to be accountability for what took place today. This attack on our democracy and the Congress and the Capitol and the rule of law should not be tolerated, and all options should be on the table. to
well,
bring about that.
I want to follow up on that because your colleague, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, is saying she's drawing up articles of impeachment for President Trump for what she's seen since the election, for the abuses of power she's seen since the election. Is that something that's on the table?
We haven't had an opportunity to talk as a caucus. We haven't had an opportunity to convene and discuss how we move forward in the context of accountability. But when I say all options are on the table, I mean all options should be on the table.
Including impeachment.
And every other process.
Including impeachment.
All options are on the table.
Congressman, thank you for your time today. Stay safe. Good luck in the coming hours. I want to bring in Trish Turner from the Capitol as well. Trish, you've been getting some reporting on the senators starting to meet and try to figure out the way forward.
Yeah, that's right, George. We were a group of the media, including myself and one of my ABC colleagues, Ali Pecorin. We were escorted by Capitol Police and ATF officers to one of the Senate buildings. We've been asked not to say what the location is. Kind of seems like they brought us here to make sure that we are safe along with the senators, so we're near where they're meeting. They're in one of the larger hearing rooms on the Capitol complex, and they are they're meeting, trying to figure the way forward. As you heard from the congressman there, they are determined to move forward. It's unclear if they're able to actually keep the Senate debate session going on, over the first objection. We did come in contact with one of the supporters of the objection, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. We tried to ask him, he said none of this should be tolerated, none of the violence should be tolerated, the looting, and storming of the Capitol. But we tried to ask him if this might spur him to withdraw the objections, because we know that there are at least two more that Senate Republicans were prepared to support, and he would not answer that question. So unclear how they're going to move forward. We did see, we've seen senators moving in and out. I don't believe there's a lot of business they can conduct in this hearing room. But we do have poll reporters inside there. It's sort of a continuity of government situation at the moment, which is rather surreal. But that's the situation where we are at the moment.
Okay, Trish Turner, thank you very much. As this has all been unfolding, more news has been made in the political world. I want to bring in Rick Klein, our political director. It is now official. John Ossoff, the Democrat, has won in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago, but only 24 hours ago, it was voters in Georgia, and both of those Senate seats are flipping. And it looked like a long shot for Democrats. They sat there at the end of election night, 2 seats short, but they won both of them in the state of Georgia. And it will give Democrats control of the Senate as of January 20th. When Biden and Harris are sworn in, Harris becomes the tie-breaking vote. And there's no small degree of irony in that the images of a storming of the Capitol, including the Senate chamber today by Trump supporters, it will be Democrats in control of the Senate as well as the House, all of government, come January 20th.
Rick Klein, thanks very much. Mary Bruce, that comes on January 20th when Joe Biden is inaugurated. First item of business will be, it was supposed to be dealing with the pandemic. Of course, that will still be front and center. But these images today, these actions today, is going to change the tenor for this entire Congress. It's going to mark the early days of the Biden presidency.
George, I look at this image right here, and that's exactly where the president is normally sworn in. Quite a contrast to what we are seeing right there, and hard to imagine that this doesn't loom large still and overshadow much of the beginning of the Biden presidency. His top priority has been to try and unite the country. It is going to be very hard to do that, clearly, given what we are seeing, given it's obvious that many of the president's supporters simply don't view Joe Biden as a legitimate president. But Joe Biden, of course, has promised repeatedly to be a president for all Americans, whether you support him or not. And he does want to get to business very rapidly. Of course, tackling the pandemic is the top priority. Doing something to give Americans more of a financial lifeline. So another stimulus, another COVID stimulus bill is also something that you're going to see happen in quite short order. And then because Democrats do control or will control Congress, that does change everything. It changes the scope and the scale of Biden's ambitions here and his ability to fulfill so many of his campaign promises. It doesn't change everything because, of course, it is a 50-50 split in the Senate. That is a very, very small majority. Of course, the vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, will be the tie-breaking vote, but it does mean that on so many issues, Joe Biden will be able to go big, certainly much bigger than he would have envisioned if Republicans were still in control of the Senate. And just remarkable to have this happen today, to have 24 hours, after we saw these races in Georgia, to have to see what we are seeing, to see the divide in the Republican Party play out in this way is just remarkable. And
to see what we are seeing right now as you were talking, those detonations on the steps of the Capitol as you were talking, smoke being cleared as well. People didn't seem to scatter as the detonations took off, as there we see some more of them as well, these flash bombs. I don't know who we have down there. Is Martha Raddatz anywhere close to that scene? Martha, can you tell us? Rachel Scott. Okay, Rachel Scott, you're down there. Can you tell us what's happening there, Rachel?
Police have finally taken back this section of the Capitol. If you can take a look just right behind, you can see them clearing out the final demonstrators and protesters that stormed the barricades, climbed over, pushed up, passed, and stormed inside of the Capitol building here. This entire area, George, was completely blocked off. I want to show you. You could see some of the gates and the barricades that were set up here. On the other side, they have all been torn down as these demonstrators and protesters charged up those steps and into the Capitol building. I talked to so many here today. They came from Florida. They came from Georgia. I was on a flight from Georgia after covering those runoff elections just yesterday. They said they wanted to stand by the president. They wanted to help him fight an election that he overwhelmingly lost. And they said they would not accept the result until he said that he had lost this race. They feel like they were answering a call directly from the president here today. And as that message came out, we have seen some of the demonstrators in this area clear. On the other side of the Capitol building, we watched as some of those demonstrators climbed up scaffolding, climbed onto the steps, banged on the glass, chanting "Fight for Trump," chanting USA. But George, I got to tell you, there is just one image that I cannot get out of my mind as I'm talking to you here. And it was just a few feet away as we were standing, watching all of this unfold. Ambulances rushing out one woman. She was gushing out blood. They rushed her into that ambulance and drove her away. We do not know what the condition was, but it was just a really tense moment here. And watching these matter of events just unfold and take a turn in a few short hours, George.
A heartbreaking moment, Rachel. Okay, thanks very much. I want to bring in Brad Garrett, FBI Special Agent. Brad, Rachel was just describing how they've cleared at least one side of the Capitol right now. Based on your experience, describe what's going to be happening over the next several hours.
So, George, you have to do this sort of in stages. You have people next to the building. They've used, it looks, some type of tear gas to move them. As you pointed out, it has limited effect on some people. Other people moved. And they'll gradually have to move that out because realistically, you can't use the National Guard to do baseline law enforcement stuff. You're going to use them as a perimeter. And so once they get the people pushed out, they basically are going to have to stay as a ring, in my view, in some form or fashion around the Capitol. Because the reality is when you push them out eventually as we go into nightfall, George, there's always tomorrow and the next day. And so this is not like that there won't be other groups of people. And one other thing, as this gets later, and I think Martha pointed this out, you're going to have other players try to get involved in this that'll be more of an instigator type person. And they're going to have to deal with those folks. But you clearly have to get them moving out of the way, or at least out of the immediate perimeter of the building before it gets dark.
Brad Garrett, thanks very much. The darkness is starting to fall there in Washington, D.C., a little after 5 p.m. here on the East Coast. I want to bring in Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Congresswoman Lee, what can you tell us about what you've been told, how this is going to unfold over the next several hours?
Well, George, I think you know, first of all, that the chambers were attacked in the midst of the counting of the electoral votes. Members were engaged in a constitutional duty. The chambers were attacked, guns were drawn, tear gas. Members were told to flee. I don't think you can get away from that as we begin to unwind as to what will be next. We're in a secure, unknown place at this time, and members are asked to stand by as the work begins to discern and to determine how safe we can be in order to proceed with the constitutional duty that we have. And we do have that commitment to do that constitutional duty, and that is counting the electoral votes.
And Congresswoman, do you have any understanding of how this was allowed to happen, if the proper preparations were in place?
You know, this is a democracy, and I did send out a message even before this started that I did not have any fear and would stand to do our duty. That's America. We believe in democracy. We believe that people have a right to have a difference of opinion. But this was not a difference of opinion. This was a call to war and a call to action as called by the sitting president of the United States. Individuals thought they were coming to defend the president. And I don't have any access to news except what each of us are hearing. But I'm really calling on President Trump to ask these rioters to stand down. They're no longer protesters, and we welcome protests. That is what we do in this country, and we'll stand for them and their right to express their First Amendment views anytime. That's our job. But this was an attack. These are rioters. These are people climbing the wall. These are people violating the office of the Speaker of the House. And so I think what has to be done, every aspect of our heading to the chambers has to be secured so that the work can continue. But members are committed for the work to continue. But I am asking, and I think the country would benefit from some message from President Donald Trump to tell his rioters to stand down, to realize that the democratic process has to proceed. And as you well know, Republicans are standing up and objecting. That is a process they have a right to do. But the violence that occurred immediately threw, if I might, a spear into the heart of democracy that we're trying to save. And we've got to save democracy.
Moments ago, I was talking to your colleague, Hakeem Jeffries, who was talking about the importance of accountability, including for the president, after these actions of today. And he said that when I asked him about Ilhan Omar's drawing up of articles of impeachment, that, quote, everything is on the table. Do you think impeachment should be considered?
I think it should, and I guess there'll be a number of members doing so, because I am drawing up, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, articles of impeachment. I think we have seen today some actions that in our lifetime we would never have expected to see, and frankly, in the last century we never saw. In this century we never saw, and as I made note of the fact, last time Americans stood up against each other was the Civil War, and of course President Lincoln, of whom we all admire with affection for his duty to this nation and his patriotism, really spoke to the heart of that and said a nation divided against itself, or at least his words connoted that. A nation divided against itself cannot stand. And I want us to be united. I want us to have the freedom to express our opposition and disagreement. But what Donald Trump generated was a violation of his duty, was an abuse of power, was clearly, I think, it calls out for accountability. It calls out for accountability. I'm sad to say that, but it calls out for accountability. And I can't tell George, has he taken, and as I'm asking him, please come to the public microphone and to give comfort to his supporters and ask them to stand down, ask them to protest peacefully and to cease the attack against the United States Capitol, the capital of the United States of America.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time today. We hope you stay safe as well. I want to bring in Mary Bruce. Mary, you've gotten some new pictures of what was happening inside, I guess, the Speaker's office?
Yeah, George, a remarkable image here that I think is one that just encapsulates this day, and something that I think, we will remember this day for. One of these protesters, one of these anarchists who have stormed the Capitol, sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk. That is the desk of the House Speaker. That appears to be her ceremonial office. You see this man there sitting casually, his feet disrespectfully on her desk, on a folder of hers. There have been, of course, reports of looting and vandalism throughout the halls of the Capitol, throughout other offices as well. But, of course, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been a frequent target of President Trump's. He has taken her on, sort of tried to villainize her in some ways. She and the president have certainly gone head-to-head and many times in the past. But this image, I think, is just one that I think will be seared in the minds of many Americans going forward. This Trump supporter sitting at the House Speaker's desk, his boot on her desk, George.
How did they get that far? How did they get in the Capitol? How were they able to take over? Those are questions that are going to have to be answered in the coming days. Mary Bruce, thanks very much. I want to bring in Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana. Senator, I assume you're safe right now. What can you tell us about what's going to be happening next for you and your fellow senators in this debate?
We're sheltering in place, and so obviously they have to clear the Capitol. But I will echo what Congresswoman Lee said. We must complete this process. This is an attempt to disrupt a constitutionally ordered process. It's what happens in third world countries. It should not be happening in the United States of America. And so as soon as this Capitol is cleared, it would be my vote to go back in that chamber and finish this process.
That is, I guess, everyone's hope at this point. What responsibility, as you just heard, Congresswoman Lee, I know you were listening, does the president bear for how these protesters have acted today?
Say that one more time. I didn't quite understand how your question was phrased.
What responsibility does the president bear for these protests today, for these actions taking over the Capitol?
Clearly, these people are angry that the president lost. The president can speak to them like no other. I've tweeted out a message asking that the president would speak to them without any sort of equivocation, that they need to stand down, that this is what, again, happens in third world countries, not in the United States of America. This is criminal activity, and that it discredits anything that the president would hope to stand for. And the president needs to do that on television. He needs to do it without equivocation and without any sort of kind of, what would you say, codicil or any sort of thing that would otherwise moderate that explicit stand down.
Well, and is that what we saw earlier in that 1-minute videotape message where he called on them to stand down but told the supporters he loved them and that the election was indeed stolen?
So I don't think we should be speaking about stolen elections. I think we should be speaking about how we should not be rioting in the United States Capitol, and this is an assault upon our democracy.
When do you expect to get back to work?
I don't know that, George. Right now it's still fluid. I'm watching on television and see all the police lights, and so we shall see. But as far as I'm concerned, we stay here until we do this. It is our constitutional responsibility.
Senator Cassidy, stay safe. Thanks for joining us this evening. Want to bring in Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, one of the things we saw, and I was talking to Chris Christie about this in our last hour, the contrast in the president's statement to his supporters and what we heard from him this summer in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not going lost on so much of the American public. And I would venture to say particularly black and brown people in our country. Those images that we all lived through over the summer of black and brown protesters, as many people said, protesting peacefully, met with resistance, met with armed authorities, flashbangs that we saw that we're not seeing today, that we didn't see flashbangs until fairly recently in this protest. And that's not lost on the American public and people of color in our country who are wondering, why is this discrepancy in how justice is being carried out today, and whether this is in fact justice being carried out, and if this is equal justice in what we're seeing here.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. I want to bring in John Santucci, one of our White House producers. John, what are you learning from inside the White House right now?
Inside the White House, George, it's relatively quiet. It's calm. I'm told the president has been bouncing between the Oval and his private dining room, which is just off from the Oval Office, watching coverage today. There's been a small number of aides that have seen the president in person. They include Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, and Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter and senior advisor. They had been lobbying him all day to get out and do something. That was, of course, that video message that we saw he released earlier on Twitter. But, George, the White House has been getting calls, from my understanding, all afternoon from members up on Capitol Hill. The president not taking many of those calls, but his staffers, the few that remain, are. All of them saying the same thing, George. He needs to get out there, needs to do more. Even after that Twitter video message, which some said was at least something, they still believe, those callers, needs more to be done. As far as the building itself, we've been reporting on this, George, as you know, for the last several weeks. The number of people physically in the building has decreased. It's people that have slowly left, slowly transitioned out. I am told that many people did not physically go to work today because they were fearful of two things. One, the violence that they expected to break out, which obviously we've been covering all day, but also the rage of the president, who has been railing against the vice president and many others in his senior staff over the last several days. The other part, too, George, that we need to remember, and a source pointed this out to me as well, is that the beginning of this week, it started the new year, started the new Congress. It also started the transition. There are staffers in the White House that have already begun the offboarding process. They are slowly turning over their government phones and computers because come January 20th, George, as you know, they're not going to be government employees.
John, you may not be able to answer this, but you know the president well. You've covered him closely for the last 5 years plus. Do you have any sense that any of this is seeping in, that he understands what has happened, that he understands he needs to do more?
George, and it's a little close to 6 years, as we know, to be honest. But as what one person said to me, which spoke volumes, and this is from a person I've known since the beginning, the president is still in the denial phase of the grief process. He has not accepted the fact he has lost. He cannot understand it. He cannot fathom it, and thus cannot move forward. There are people, George, that around him are trying to make the necessary preparations for what happens next. He's got to go somewhere. Does he go down to Mar-a-Lago? Do they do some type of an event to thank staff? How does he leave the White House? Does he greet President-elect Joe Biden on January 20th? Two people said to me just days ago that no one can approach him about the January 20th, what do we do conversation. He's just not there yet.
Well, that's just crazy. Okay, John Santucci, thanks very much. I want to go back to Martha Raddatz there near the Capitol. They're starting to move people away.
They're starting to move some people away, George, but behind me are a line of people that you can see the police officers there. They've been putting some of the rioters into police vehicles. You can see a lot of them handcuffed. There have been several of them that they've put into vehicles. We haven't seen them yet on this side move towards the Capitol, but there's been a lot of movement from the police. We also saw, we keep moving back, because there was an area there were media behind a barrier, and they burst down the barrier, these rioters, and destroyed the media gear. There's a big pile of media gear crushed over there by the Capitol, so we have moved back here, but they are definitely starting to arrest some people and load them into vans.
So you've been moved to a calmer place, but is it your sense from where you were that it's de-escalating there as well, or not really?
No, not really. I think it's, again, these sort of more hardcore groups, and we've seen the Oath Keepers and I assume Proud Boys over there at the Capitol. We weren't actually moved. We haven't been moved at all. We moved ourselves because they were destroying media gear up there, some of the rioters. But what we have seen is the perimeter. The police are definitely forming a perimeter, and I think at some point they probably will clear out those other rioters there who are not leaving that area, especially that area where you enter the security area, where there were some windows broken on this side and where we heard those flashbangs to try to clear people out of there. We don't really know who's setting those off. There's been nobody really to talk to about any of that, and it's basically what we can see and hear, and we heard those flashbangs go off. We've seen the police go down the street in very long lines down Constitution Avenue. I'm looking directly at the Capitol right now, but we came over here because it was safer over here, obviously, and obviously because they're bringing people out. Now, we don't know. This is the Russell Senate Office Building. We don't know whether they've been in there for a while, whether they were people from the Capitol they rounded up and put in here and are now taking out. We saw no one arrested. We're just seeing these individuals being taken away now. So they may have been people who were in the Capitol who they managed to get out. We just don't know at this point.
Perimeter around the Capitol now. You see the sirens, you see the flashes. We're glad you moved to a safer location. Martha, thank you. Let me go to John Greenblatt with the Anti-Defamation League. And John, we've been talking a lot about these protesters today that have become rioters at the Capitol. It is a situation that has been building for some time. Yes. You've been tracking white supremacist group. You've tracked the Proud Boys. What can you tell us about what you've seen today? And is it something we should have been surprised by?
Yeah, George, this was a dark day for democracy. I think we've been talking about this for years, for months, in recent days, because we take these extremists at their word, and they have been telling us that they plan to mobilize and commit acts of violence. And I think the displays that we saw today on our television screens, the images literally of extremists storming the halls of Congress. I mean, to be clear about how extreme this was, this didn't happen during the U.S. Civil War. So what we saw today in modern times is without precedent. I would say that the responsibility for this grotesquerie lies at the feet of President Trump, who has been stoking division and spreading disinformation and spawning hate for years. And the people who he assembled today, George, it was a who's who of right-wing extremists. There were members of the Oath Keepers, an anti-government militia, an armed militia group, the Groyper Army, whose leader Nick Fuentes was there. They were a white supremacist organization. The European Heritage Association, another white supremacist group. There were Proud Boys who were present. We're still not sure of all the people who were actually arrested inside the Capitol today, but my analysts are looking at the images, and I'm certain we're going to know very many of them, because their ability to this, in many ways, George, this was a bookend to Charlottesville, where white supremacists marched openly and proudly down the streets of that college town. Today they were doing it literally through the hall of the center of power of the United States government.
Well, it's hard. I mean, I was going to ask you, where does it go next? It's hard to imagine something worse than breaching the Capitol as we see these pictures of guns drawn in the House chamber today. But where does this go next? Is there any method to all this? Is there any end game? What should we be thinking about? What should we be worried about?
Well, what we need to understand is that, there are those in the far right who literally espouse a theory called boogaloo. What they want is civil war. They want armed unrest in the streets. Tonight, they can claim that they achieved that at the U.S. Capitol building. I think where this goes is we are going to need a whole
let me just stop you. So is this is a battle won in their view?
Well, I think they will likely champion this day and look back on this moment, their ability to breach the Capitol, as a historic achievement. Those images that you showed earlier of that individual sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk, or the other images of white supremacists literally standing in the Senate chamber, there's just no precedent for that, George, and they will claim it as a victory.
Jonathan Greenblatt, thanks very much. CEO, National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Tom Yamas, you have more images from inside the Capitol today?
Yeah, this one coming from Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. I want to put it up on the screen right now. These were the wooden boxes that were holding the Electoral College ballots. The caption reads, "Electoral College ballots rescued from the Senate floor. If our capable floor staff hadn't grabbed them, they would have been burned by the mob." George, as you know, those Senate floor staff, I think you worked in the House, the floor staff as well, you don't make a lot of money. You take those jobs because you love government and civics, and those staff members had enough mindset, even during this wild time, to take those Electoral College ballots, which were going to be counted and certified today by both houses of Congress. That is not going to happen. We are just getting word from Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. He's saying that the Senate intends on certifying the Electoral College ballots tonight, that they're not going to be driven out. We're going to have to wait and see if they're able to do that, because right now the Capitol is the largest crime scene in America. But according to Manchin, they want to stay tonight and make sure, I guess they do right by this.
Okay, we hope we'll try to get Senator Manchin on the phone with us as well. Let me go back to, is Ben Siegel with us at the Capitol right now, Mark? Let me bring in Ben Siegel. What more can you tell us about what you're hearing from your sources there inside the Capitol, the situation as night has fallen, as we see this perimeter being formed around the Capitol?
George, I'm talking to Democrats and Republicans in the House, and it's their expectation, like their colleagues in the Senate, that they continue this business, that they continue this joint session of Congress to certify the election results. Technically, they would go back and resume the sessions regarding the debate over the elector from Arizona. But they want this to happen. They want to get this done. This is their responsibility. But it's just not clear how quickly this can happen. I was talking to one House Republican leadership aide who said they have to go and make sure the floor is safe and they have to clear everything up. You know, there's broken glass everywhere. There's furniture that was put in front of the door to prevent people from coming in. Gas masks probably still on the floor. So there's that work that has to get done in addition to securing the Capitol. You know, people who work on Capitol Hill always joke about it being sort of like a village and almost like Hogwarts from the Harry Potter universe. This is a bunch of buildings with underground tunnels, tons of entrances, exits. It's going to take a really long time to make sure that the campus is safe and secure, and that there aren't still people, elements who want to disrupt the process in the building. So rank and file members, leadership aides still do not know when they will move forward on this. They are all ready to, as a lot of the members are telling you in these interviews, but it's just not clear at this time when that will happen.
Take another minute on that, Ben, because I think you hit on a very important point right there. We see the Capitol right there. There are 3 House buildings on Independence Avenue side, 3 Senate buildings on the Constitution Avenue side, the Library of Congress and the Supreme Court further up the street. And what most people don't understand in this is that everything you see above ground is matched by an entire warren of offices and tunnels below ground.
That's right. It's basically like a human anthill where the business of the country and the politics get done. Almost every building is connected through multiple tunnels. The members of Congress use these buildings, use these tunnels to get to and from votes during the winter, during inclement weather. They were actually instructed to use these tunnels today because of protests. Ironically enough, and you know, this is tens of thousands of people work here every day when there's not a pandemic, and there are just so many ways in and out of the building. If you're somebody who's protesting, you know, and trying to get in there, trying to disrupt this process, it takes a lot of people to secure the facility and all the entrances and all these different buildings, the 3 or 4 House office buildings and the Library of Congress buildings, and then the 3 Senate buildings on the other side of the building. And, you know, one thing that I was struck by watching some of these images coming in from the Capitol and some of these really frightening scenes of people breaching the Capitol, you know, for the first time in hundreds of years, people making it through the Capitol and occupying it. You know, there are hallways and places in the Capitol that you pass on your walks every day to and from getting coffee, to or from your desk, that are really unremarkable. You know, it's a window that's locked on both sides that looks out to the Washington Monument that you really can't get access or use. Sort of these hallways that are locked off for security reasons that don't really lead anywhere. And today, these images were just so striking. You had almost all these windows were broken and people were trying to swarm in. And it was almost as if they did not have enough Capitol police officers to deal with anything. It's almost remarkable in one sense that we've only heard of just sort of a handful of instances of gunshots and maybe 1 or 2 injuries from protesters. I'm surprised it's not actually more, quite frankly. So they really have a tall order ahead of them trying to secure this whole facility and also make sure that you know, it's protected so that the members of Congress, the more than 500 members of Congress, can go back to doing their work in both chambers. And then also, you know, we're not even talking about the inauguration. That's going to be another gargantuan task to secure and protect, because everything you're seeing everywhere on the west front of the Capitol facing the Washington Monument, where you're seeing these protesters fan out and you know, they're not even being pushed back from some of these places. That's still the grounds of the Capitol. That's where the members of Congress might even be sitting when Joe Biden takes the oath of office. So they have to really figure out how to not just secure the Capitol, but expand that perimeter and get it in a position where they can actually continue preparing for the inauguration, which is only happening in a couple weeks.
Ben, you spend most of your days up there on Capitol Hill. You deal with these hundreds, thousands of staffers, most of them young, in the Capitol. As you spoke with everyone today, how would you describe what they were feeling, what their state of mind was as this was all unfolding?
It's a real mix of fear and apprehension and disappointment. Throughout our broadcast, we keep saying, Joe Biden said the siege of the Capitol, and it's almost unbelievable to hear that the seat of American democracy in this country, which is respected and admired from all around the world. People come here from all around the country and the world to work to try to make this country better. To see it, vandalized and broken into and desecrated, it's not something that anybody who ever comes to work here every day, would really expect to happen in this country and really anywhere. And it's just such a magical place where again, people have their differences and they have their disagreements, but there is still comedy. There is still a sense of we're all in this together. We're all trying to make the country better when you talk to Republicans and Democrats, and for that matter, reporters up there who want people to understand what's happening in their government and how the Congress functions. And you always see something new in the Congress. You always see a new detail, a new statue, a new historical figure. You can get lost in the building just soaking in the history and everything that's happened there. And the fact that we're seeing something now that's never played out in American history. I think people from college graduates to the grizzled veterans and people who have been up on the Hill for decades are it's disappointment really and just sadness across the spectrum.
Thank you, Ben. Mary Alice Parks, let me bring you in on this as well. As Ben was talking, I was thinking back to my early days on Capitol Hill. That's what was always so special about the Capitol. It truly is the people's house. People walk through it all day long. Members of Congress speak with their constituents all day long. Staffers going back and forth. All of that put to a stop today. I know you've been speaking with many of them as well. What are you hearing?
Yeah, and they're doing the people's business, but they're humans themselves. I mean, the texts that I've had today have been from young staffers who are hiding in closets, texts that we normally get during mass shootings. I've had texts from staffers who are trying to make sure that their bosses are okay. Bosses, members of Congress who are huddled in other members' offices trying to shelter in place. I was texting with one colleague at one point today who didn't want to tell me where they were or speak loudly on the phone because they were worried they might be heard by some of these, we're not even sure what to call them anymore, these anarchist protesters, terrorists in the hallway. They didn't want to speak too loudly because they were nervous about whether they would be revealing their location. I mean, just the amount of fear and anxiety on a human level that I think we shouldn't lose today. But, I just also want to take a moment. I was really rattled when Jonathan Greenblatt, who you had on just a little bit ago, he kept referring to the Civil War. And he was not using that imagery lightly. I was thinking about the fact that just 2 weeks ago, we had President Trump veto a very popular bipartisan spending bill, partly on grounds that he didn't want military bases to be renamed for Confederate names to be overturned. And we had this morning Mike Pence referring back to a time in our history right after the Civil War when the country was trying to piece itself together and had to reinvent these rules around the Electoral College. You just have this feeling today that we are seeing images that harken back to a time of Civil War that I never thought in my lifetime we would be seeing or having to even have a conversation about again.
On that point, one of the most striking images of the day, I don't know if we have it, Mark, but that image of one of the protesters walking through Statuary Hall in the Capitol, a Confederate flag over his shoulder in the Capitol of the United States. Mary Alice, thank you. I want to bring in Congressman Ken Buck, Republican of Colorado, also former law enforcement officer. I know you were on the floor as this all unfolded. Congressman, I'm glad you're safe. Tell us what you saw.
Hello?
Hi, Congressman.
Yes.
Hi, I just want to thank you for joining us. I was saying I'm glad you're safe. Tell us what you saw as this all unfolded on the House floor earlier this afternoon.
Well, I was one of the speakers, and so I was on the House floor. The first thing that happened was plainclothes Capitol officers came in and escorted the speaker from the chair. We resumed debate at that point. We were informed soon after that the House, the Capitol building had been breached. About 10 minutes after that, we were advised to reach under our chairs to grab a gas mask and put a gas mask on because tear gas had been deployed in the Capitol. about 10, 15 minutes after that, we could start hearing the doors being banged on, and it appeared that people were trying to breach the house floor itself. So a group of us grabbed some of the heavy furniture, credenzas and whatnot, and moved it in front of the doors to try to prevent that from happening. Police officers were there. They had drawn their weapons, and at that point, the glass to the doors, the glass on the doors, was being broken, and as that happened, more and more members were being escorted off. I left with the last 4 or 5 members. There were at least 20 to 30 police officers in the House floor at that point, House chamber at that point, and we went through the tunnels and got back. Make sure my staff was all right, and then joined them.
You're explaining it in an admirably low-key way, but the image of you and your fellow members of Congress barricading yourself inside the House floor is hard to believe.
It is hard to believe, and it's hard to believe that it happens in America. And what started out as a peaceful protest really involved criminal action and is unacceptable in our country.
You're a Republican. You were urging your colleagues to certify the election results. Do you understand what's behind this protest? Or is even engaging that question trying to rationalize something that shouldn't be rationalized?
Well, I don't know that it should be rationalized, and I don't know it should be rationalized moments after something like this happens. But certainly I think in the months to come, we will look back and recognize the frustration that has occurred, and we all are to blame for some of this. The rhetoric, so many other things that have occurred that one side or the other feels has been unfair. And obviously the outcome of the election made millions of people believe that it was unfair. And while I believe that Joe Biden won the election and we will have a peaceful transfer of power, I also recognize and feel as though we have to recognize the fact that there are questions about the election in some of the states, and we should look at that to make sure Americans have confidence in this process.
Right, but that is quite different from the president telling his supporters just hours ago that this election was stolen. Do you have any expectation that he can come out and do more to calm the situation down?
Do I have any anticipation that the president will come out and do something more to calm the situation down? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I think that the president's statement, he asked people to go home. I think that the Attorney General has made it clear that Attorney General Bill Barr has made it clear that what's going on in the Capitol is despicable and has to cease right away. And I think many others of us are sending out social media messages that are clear. While we're conservatives, we absolutely don't tolerate a violation of the rule of law, and that's what we're witnessing right now.
And moving forward, what should be on the agenda now?
Well, I think we have to make sure that the world sees that Congress is back in session. We are going to certify this vote. We are going to have a peaceful transfer of power. We should, among other things, look at our system of electing our president and make sure that it is credible and all Americans have confidence in it. And I think that we resume our duties to do the people's work.
Congressman, thanks for your time today. I'm glad you're safe. I want to bring in Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia. Senator Manchin, we just heard one of your colleagues saying you're determined to go through the night to get this done. Is that realistic?
Yes, I think it is, George. We were all together, and we're all secure, and we're all safe. And it's been a sobering moment to watch those who were kind of at odds up in the floor previously before this fiasco started, and the mob did what they did. And we were all ushered into this safe area. And people started talking and going around, and I made a point to talk to all of the senators. They're my friends, and they're objecting. I respect their right to object. I spoke to them, and I think they're having second thoughts on this, what this has done and what the outcome has been. So the main thing that we're determined on is staying here. We're not going to let a mob run us out. They're not going to run us away from our job and our duty and our responsibility to govern. And I feel very, you know what, George, in this most difficult, challenging times, it might be this horrible act that starts uniting us back and doing our job the way we're supposed to, and starting basically bringing America back together.
Well, the last time Congress seemed to be unified, America seemed to be unified, was after the 9/11 attacks, almost 20 years ago. This is an attack from our own country, from our own people.
I just can't believe it. I can't believe the President of the United States would incite this type of action. You know, it's just unacceptable. It's un-American. I've never seen anything like it. I can't believe how a human being could think this way. I really can't. We might have our differences political, but it doesn't mean I've got to be at odds to where I want to destroy you.
So in your talks with your fellow senators, friends and colleagues, even the ones who are objecting, did you get a sense, you said they might be having some second thoughts, you get a sense they might be scaling back their objections so this can be finished?
I'm very hopeful of that. I can tell you that they were all very somber, those, you know, because they were basically doing whatever they believed, and they have a right to do that. As a senator and as a congressperson, you have rights to represent the constituents and the people that you have taken an oath to. But you take an oath to the Constitution. We don't take an oath to a monarchy or a dictator. We took an oath to a Constitution. And the Constitution is owned by the Republic and the people of the Republic. And, you know, I talked to all of them, as many as I could, of the 13 or 12 or 13 senators that were objecting. And I said, I would hope that you all think. I said, I respect your right. You're my friend, and you will continue to be my friend. But I hope you see what's causing it and what's inciting this. And only you and all of us working together can tamp this down and bring our country back together. I'm hoping that got through, George. I really am.
Well, you were working with several of your colleagues in the weeks before this happened to try to build a bipartisan consensus on COVID relief, on that COVID relief bill. It's going to be more necessary than ever coming up in the new Congress, even though Democrats, it appears now, will gain control. It'll be a 50-50 split right down the middle. Those of you in the Senate are going to hold the whip hand.
Well, you know, we don't look at it from that standpoint. It's not having the power to use or abuse. It's basically having the power to unite, and that's what we will use. And we're staying together. We're not going to be faltering in our objection to make this government work again. We got to get back to regular order. We've got to go through a process. Bills have to come to the floor that are bipartisan. It has to be voted, and it has to be amendments. We can make adjustments and all that, and we'll take some tough votes. This is ridiculous what's been going on for the last decade, and we've got to stop it. And I think on both sides, but I can tell you, the bipartisan bicameral group that we put together that brought a package forward that finally got passed to help the American people, this is a group to continue to move this country in the most sensible, reasonable way.
Well, if an act like what we've seen today cannot bring people together, I don't know what can. Senator Manchin, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you stay safe as you work through tonight. Thanks very much, Senator.
We're going to work. We'll get this job done. Okay, thanks, George. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Let me bring Mary Bruce back. You heard the senator say there that he's been talking to some of his colleagues who are having second thoughts. You've been in some contact with some House members as well?
Yeah, and George, we are hearing very similar that some of those who have been or were vowing to contest the election results may now be changing their minds. They certainly are going to be, I think, under a lot of pressure, especially since, of course, none of this is going to change the results of the election, right? What we were seeing before all of this erupted was really a show simply for the president. And given the fact that it was this effort to try and publicly object to the election results that had sparked, in many ways, this siege that we have seen here today, it would be interesting to see if some Republicans are going to change their minds. There are reports that the #2 Republican in the House, Cathy McMorris Rodgers, has decided to do just that she was planning to object, but now in light of what we have seen here today, that she will not stand in the way of this anymore. And we should say, George, we are also hearing that the Sergeant-at-Arms has told members that the Capitol building is now secure and has been cleared. And since we know that members are eager, certainly, to finish the work that they started today to go ahead and certify the results of the Electoral College. It will be interesting to see if they are able to get back to work, where they are able to get back to work, whether they do this, in the chamber or in another secured location. We are keeping a close eye on all of that. But the Sergeant at Arms, again, we are hearing he has told members that the Capitol building is secure.
Mary, that's pretty big news that it could happen that quickly.
We don't know exactly how we don't know when this might happen, but we do know that members are eager for this to move ahead, and some vowing that they want to do this, tonight if possible.
Okay, Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Tom Yamas, there have been some actions on social media today.
Right, Facebook and Twitter as well both flagged the president's video that he released, and we were talking a short time ago about how this video probably maybe made things even worse. Even though the president was trying to ask some of those rioters to leave, he starts with, the lie that the election was stolen, and now Facebook, the vice president of integrity, tweeting, "This is an emergency situation, and we are taking appropriate emergency measures, including removing President Trump's video. We removed it because on balance, we believe it contributes to rather than diminishes the risk of ongoing violence." Rebecca Jarvis, our chief business correspondent, has a statement from Facebook which reads, "The violent protests in the Capitol today are a disgrace. We prohibit incitement and calls for violence on our platform. We are actively reviewing and removing any content that breaks these rules." So clearly Facebook and Twitter, which flagged the video, having major issues and major problems with the president's message, which was billed, as Kellyanne had told you, a message of peace and to leave. But clearly there were other messages, especially at the beginning of that video, that can be interpreted a different way.
Well, and that leads to another question, and this has been speculated about. Once the president is no longer president, how long will his Twitter account stay active? If they're willing to take this kind of action when he's president of the United States, you can imagine they might take even more drastic action once he leaves office.
But it's never stopped him, right, George? And it's one of his active hobbies is to communicate, especially with his supporters. He has one of the largest, if not the largest, following on social media, and he's not afraid to use it. He's not afraid to post, even if he does get taken down.
He considers it as essential governing political tool.
I mean, he owes part of his presidential victory to it. It was a microphone, those campaign rallies, and his Twitter account that got him so much attention. I want to be clear because some of these images that we're seeing the rioters taking these selfies with smiles on their faces inside the House chamber and the Senate chamber. We can't forget, a woman has been shot tonight. Okay, a woman has been shot tonight. There was also chemical agents that were used on police. And from some of the videos we've seen, clearly they had tools and weapons to break in to Capitol Hill. So this was not sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was not a big joke. Let's take some selfies inside of Capitol Hill. This was a riot, and that's what we should call it. That's what we are calling it.
And what we heard from the congressman from Oklahoma earlier today, at least 25 Capitol Police injured.
George, it's so bad. I mean, when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. The governor of New Jersey says that they have asked for help. So now state police in New Jersey are going to protect Washington, D.C. It's hard to believe.
Tom Yamas, thanks very much. Let me bring in Senator Jeff Merkley this afternoon. Senator, we showed that picture you had taken or you had obtained of the staffers protecting the Electoral College ballots. We're showing it again right there. Remarkable that had to be done.
Oh, absolutely, because the rioters would have busted those open, burned those ballots, and it just feels something sacred about those boxes holding the decisions of the citizens of the United States on the election of our president. So just tremendous appreciation to those staffers who smartly grabbed those boxes and protected them.
Tell us what you've been going through today, what you expect to happen next, Senator.
Well, we are hoping that when the grounds are secured, and hopefully that will be within a short period of time, we'll be able to return to the Senate floor, continue the debate, hold the vote, and I believe that it will be a very, very strong vote to reject the objections to the electoral votes from Arizona, which is what was being challenged. And as I've talked to a number of my Republican colleagues, I think there is a good possibility they will drop all additional objections for other states, and we will get these votes secured. These are objections that should never have happened because the responsibility we have under the Constitution to count the ballots, the only basis in law for challenging them is if they weren't properly certified or if they misrepresent the information that should have arrived in them. And there's absolutely no contention by those who spoke on the floor that either of those things were the case. This was really an effort to say if we can take these votes away from Biden, we can send the decision to the House of Representatives where Republicans can keep Trump in power. And in that sense, it was just an absolute version of a coup that you would expect in a basically some authoritarian nation without the strength of our traditions and our obligations to the Constitution.
Senator Merkley, we heard similar feelings from Senator Joe Manchin just moments ago, saying he thought that several of the colleagues who were bringing objections were having second thoughts. Have they told you that directly, or is this still an uncertain situation?
Yeah, Brian, what you just saw over the last a couple colleagues have said that they never intended their actions to be interpreted as an effort to actually undo the election, that they were only intended to have it be a protest to say we need to pay attention to the issues that President Trump has raised. But here is the situation. When a president proceeds to lie to the American people, those Republicans had a responsibility to stand up and say, this is not true. This is like any leader who generates a mob. Other leaders need to stand up and say that information is false. They need to basically not kowtow to the mob. They need to inform and disperse it. And so what we saw today was really the result of the failure of our Republican colleagues to carry the responsibility of leadership to say President Trump is wrong, that there has been integrity in these elections, that it has been scrutinized by the state authorities, it has been reviewed meticulously by dozens of courts. This election stands, and that's what we do in a republic. We stand with the peaceful transfer of power, not an effort by an authoritarian like Trump to hang on to power through any means possible.
Senator Merkley, this was only the latest example of that kind of enabling by the president's supporters over the last 4 years. How do you explain it?
Oh, boy. There's going to be a lot of time for us to try to analyze all that's gone wrong the last 4 years. But we know from looking around the world in current times as well as in history that leaders can gain power by fostering hate, by fostering division, and that's exactly what Trump set out to do. And I heard my colleagues over the years say, well, it won't get any worse, it'll get better, this will be the end of it. And then suddenly they find that they're hostage to their base because their base has heard this message and inhaled it, come to accept it, come to believe in it. And suddenly they're worried about losing their elections and their primaries if they don't partner with this leader being President Trump. And at that point, they are enslaved or trapped by their own failure earlier on to stand up for justice, stand up for the truth. And that's where we ended up.
Senator Merkley, thank you for your time today. Good luck going forward. Good luck getting back to work tonight. We're glad you're safe. I want to go back to Martha Raddatz in Washington, D.C. It appears that at least on one side of the Capitol, much calmer now, has been cleared. What's happening where you stand?
We just saw busloads of National Guard head into the Capitol grounds, George. There have been 1,100 D.C. National Guard called up and 600 National Guard from Virginia. We see FBI officers actually just inches from us here walking down Constitution Avenue, and we'll just follow them here. Let me get out of the way. But those busloads are there. We assume they're going to clear out the last of the crowd because, George, it's now 6 p.m. There's a curfew in effect, and they've announced that anybody who's not out of there will be arrested. And there is so much law enforcement. Hang on. Hang on. We've got some more vehicles coming here. Let's get out of the way.
It's right now.
We saw those arrests earlier. We have armored police vehicles going down here. If you look down Constitution Avenue, it is all law enforcement. coming up this way, going down that way. But again, those National Guard going right there onto the Capitol grounds. They are not armed. The National Guard is not armed, but those armored vehicles now heading into the Capitol grounds where the remaining rioters, those people who would not leave, and many who probably were part of that break-in. We saw a little earlier, they were hauling off some of those rioters. They were arrested.
Constitution Avenue, Martha, usually the site of the inaugural parade.
It is just appalling to look down Constitution Avenue and just see nothing but red and blue lights of law enforcement vehicles. There is a solid perimeter, it appears to me, from this place around these Capitol grounds now. Many law enforcement, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police from D.C., police from Virginia, all descending on this area to set up this perimeter. Now, how they're going to get rid of those hundreds of people, they have definitely told them to clear out. We've seen no one come this way since 6 o'clock, no one walking down this way, trying to clear out that area. And in fact, we've seen some people kind of heading into that area.
Well, we're seeing the National Guard now get off those buses at the Capitol, prepared for some sort of action, prepared to enforce this perimeter. And we heard from Mary Bruce that the Sergeant-at-Arms believes the Capitol will be secured in the coming hours.
I think the inside of the Capitol has been secured. They announced that the inside of the Capitol has been secured. In other words, all of those rioters are out of the inside of the Capitol. I'm sure what they tried to do is go room to room before they would ever announce anything like the Capitol being cleared. The outside of the Capitol is definitely not cleared yet. I mean, we can still see a lot of those Trump supporters and those instigators as well still on the grounds. Those are the people who were remaining there after a lot of the protesters we saw had walked away, disappointed, by the way. They didn't really want to leave because they liked, they said, what had happened there today and that they had a perfect right to do that. But this is clearly the hour they're going to start trying to move those who remain. I think one part of the Capitol, and you've talked to Rachel Scott, obviously I haven't even seen her, she's so far away from me, but there's an area over on the other side that's cleared out. This side is definitely not cleared out yet. And I can't imagine they're just going to let these people leave. I mean, there is a curfew in this city. They're supposed to be inside. They're not supposed to be anywhere. So I don't know what they will do with those who remain, but I imagine there'll be numerous arrests here within the hour, George.
Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. I want to go back to Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, the president doubling and tripling down, and now a new tweet just 2 minutes ago where he talks about an election victory unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots.
George, I've covered President Trump for 4 years, and I'm speechless by this. I mean, as we are looking at these images of what Martha just described as an appalling sight unfolding in our nation's capital. You've got the president who is tweeting. He says these are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. He tells them, go home with love and in peace. And then he says, remember this day forever. Yes, history is going to remember this day forever. There was no election that was unceremoniously and viciously stripped from anyone. This was a free and fair election, and it's pathetic that we have to keep saying that over and over. And you can't have it both ways, as we've heard from Republicans, from his allies, from people who are close to him, who have tried to get this message to the president that he is the one who started this, and he is the one who could stop it if he went on television and he said outright, leave and go home peacefully. That is not what he has said. He has not called on this to stop, and he doesn't get to have it both ways here. And then you've got the flip, George. Listen to this absolutely stunning statement that I can't imagine I'm going to read from a former president of the United States, former President George W. Bush, who just released a statement that is worth reading in its entirety. He said, This is how election results are disputed in a banana republic, not our democratic republic. I am appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders since the election and by the lack of respect shown today for our institutions, our traditions, and our law enforcement. And I think as we are in this evening and we are talking about what happens next there on the Capitol and whether they go forward with this vote to certify the election tonight, the Electoral College votes tonight, and we've got these questions for the 150 House members who said that they were going to object and the 13 Republican senators who were going to object. Where were they before tonight? Where were they if they are going to change their vote, if they're no longer going to object, as we are starting to hear potentially this discussion that's happening behind closed doors right now? Do they get off the hook for what we're seeing here tonight? If they were planning to object in their votes today, and we are here right now, are they at least partly to blame for what we are seeing in the Capitol as well?
Cecilia Vega, as you were talking, we also just got a new tweet from the President's National Security Advisor. Only 14 days to go in this presidency, but he is apparently broken with the President on this as well, saying, I spoke with Vice President Pence. He is a genuinely fine and decent man. He exhibited courage today as he did at the Capitol on 9/11 as a congressman. I am proud to serve with him. A break of sorts, of course. The Vice President was doing his constitutional duty.
He was doing his constitutional duty. That's his job. The president had been pressuring him privately. The president had been pressuring him publicly. But is it too late? I mean, does Mike Pence, does Robert O'Brien, do they get credit for today saying that they did what the Constitution requires them to do, or that Robert O'Brien supports what the vice president did because that's what he is supposed to do? This is the oath of office that the vice president took when he took it 4 years ago. Do they get the credit now for not having spoken up? The president has been spreading these baseless conspiracy theories, these bald-faced lies about an election being stolen from him for 9 weeks now, and they're just not true. Court after court around our country has declared that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. I laugh at myself for having to continually say this for the last 9 weeks. It's just the facts. But the president has been spreading these lies, these mistruths, and his aides, including Mike Pence and Robert O'Brien and people in the highest echelons of this administration, have stood by his side, and they have not spoken up. And so I think that there are serious questions for them as to whether they are part of what we're seeing here today as well.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. Terry Moran, Jonathan Greenblatt was on the program in our last hour saying that today's events are in some ways a bookend to Charlottesville, that those who are rioting will look back for years as a great victory. President Trump said there were fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. The tweet 2 minutes ago praising great patriots.
And that is why, George, what happens in Congress over the next few hours is critical. This lie, a lie that the Attorney General of the United States appointed by Trump said there was no widespread fraud, that his own head of election security, all those courts, this lie must be put down. Right? This notion that the Republicans were playing with fire, lies have consequences, as Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska told his colleagues today in a statement. And the consequences we've seen. An incident like that, like today's, can become a triumph for a right-wing, fascistic, anti-democratic movement if it is allowed to fester, if it is not put down. What Congress does tonight in affirming the victory of Joe Biden against lies and fantasies and sedition is absolutely critical. If they show weakness, it will be a triumph for the forces that want to essentially ignore the election, destroy the democracy, and install Donald Trump as permanent president. This is a very critical moment, not just because of the sad scenes that we've seen, but because of what it can represent. Movements that are anti-democratic take strength from their martyrs. They take strength from their battles. And unless there's a united front against it, it can be very dangerous going forward in our politics.
The question is, will that united front be developed? We're seeing the Capitol right now. It's a little after 6:10 on the East Coast. A curfew has gone into effect across Washington, D.C. after this extraordinary day of violence at the U.S. Capitol. The Capitol under siege. Rachel Scott there in Washington, D.C. Have you noticed a significant difference in these last 10 minutes?
A significant difference, George. We have now seen most of the demonstrators and protesters in this area clear out. We are now completely surrounded on this side of the Capitol by federal authorities and a very large police presence at this point. We just heard the second announcement go off over the intercom telling people to clear the area, that the curfew is now in full effect, and if they fail to do so, that they will be arrested. Just dramatic scenes playing out. We have been here for hours. As you know, I was in Georgia just yesterday. I was on a flight back to D.C. first thing this morning. In front of me were several rows of President Trump supporters that were coming here. They wanted to stand by him in this fight to overturn the results. This is normally an area where tourists come. This is normally an area where people come to see the United States Capitol. Today, it has turned into a scene of violent, intense clashes. We have watched media be attacked. We ourselves have been caught in some of these tense clashes with some of these demonstrators here. And of course, those images of that woman who was gushing out blood, appearing to have suffered from a tremendous wound here. Authorities have now taken back this area, George, but it took hours.
And they're hoping to get started on this debate tonight. Rachel, thank you. I want to talk to Congressman Jim Langevin now, Democrat of Rhode Island. Congressman, thank you for joining us tonight. Just tell us about your day as best you can. I assume you're clearly safe right now. Were you on the floor when this all unfolded? What have you learned?
I arrived on the Capitol complex this morning, getting ready for the proceedings to begin at 1 p.m., which they did. There were only 44 members that were on both sides of the aisle, House and Senate, allowed on the floor. So most of us have been watching the proceedings from our offices, and they were going to rotate us in and out as the day went on. Then shortly around after 2 o'clock or so, we got word that protesters had stormed the Capitol and then started to and then began to interfere with the proceedings of the House and the Senate. And then shortly after that, a couple of times the House went into recess. And then we were told to shelter in place. And so I've been here in my office with a couple of my staff members, and we've been here while the Capitol Police and the FBI and now the National Guard on the scene securing the Capitol complex.
We just got a tweet from your colleague, Congressman Clyburn, Jim Clyburn, the Democratic Majority Whip, who is quoted saying, "I have faced violent hatred before. I was not deterred then. I will not be deterred now. Tonight, Congress will continue the business of certifying the Electoral College votes." What more do you know about how this is all going to unfold tonight?
That's right. We have a constitutional responsibility, and we are going to fulfill that responsibility tonight. We've heard from our leadership that as soon as the Capitol Police and law enforcement have secured the Capitol complex once again, that the proceedings of the joint session of the House and Senate to count the electoral votes will continue. That is our job, and I think it's important that we proceed tonight with that, no matter what time we have to resume. But we cannot allow this mob that stormed the Capitol, that borders on a coup attempt. It certainly is an assault on our democracy. We can't allow that to be the order of the day. We can't allow that to disrupt the work of the people and to interrupt this electoral vote count. We will count these electoral votes, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be declared the president and vice president of the United States.
And do you expect that will get finished tonight? Do you think that some of your colleagues now are going to scale back their objections in the wake of this riot?
I hope that many of my colleagues are going to reflect on what happened today and understand how important it is not to do anything that's going to further incite violence. The time for protests and questioning the outcome of the election and the electoral vote count is over. That should have, and it has been done at the state level and been certified. The election has been certified by election officials and Republican legislatures. Many times these are Republican legislatures that have certified these results. Our role in Congress right now is basically ceremonial. And for more than 200 years, every 4 years, the Congress meets in joint session, receives the electoral votes. We count those electoral votes that have been certified and sent to us. And that is the basic role. This should not have happened today. It didn't have to happen. And I'm very disappointed in President Trump that he keeps perpetuating these lies. And it's like if you keep telling a lie over and over again, people start to believe it. And it really does border on, it incites violence, it incites these protesters, and it's just wrong. The president needs to come out and speak clearly and definitively for the protesters to stand down and let the work of the people continue.
I've spoken with several of your Democratic colleagues today who say that's an abuse of power. At least 2 are drawing up articles of impeachment. Congressman Jeffries, Hakeem Jeffries, the head of the caucus, said that everything is on the table right now. Is that something that should be considered in the name of accountability?
I think in the name of accountability, everything should be on the table. But I'll say that we are 14 days away from January 20th. And on that day at noon, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be sworn in as the next president and vice president of the United States. That is a certainty. That outcome is not going to change. The people have spoken. The election results are in. For those people that don't like the results, well, there'll be an election in 4 years. But this election is over.
Congressman Langevin, thanks for your time today. Good luck tonight. Stay safe.
Thank you, George.
Tom Yamas, I want to pick up on what we were talking about with Cecilia just before we talked with the Congressman Robert O'Brien, now the National Security Advisor, praising Vice President Pence, appearing to break at some level with President Trump. The group around him is fraying.
It is, and I'd be surprised if O'Brien has a job by the end of the week, because we've seen how the president acts so quickly in this time. You know, I'm a little concerned about Congress staying tonight, because if they are going to stay tonight, law enforcement is probably thinking, let's get through this as quickly as possible without these objections, because if they delay the process, it's only going to give the rioters more time to sort of regroup. And, George, you know, we started the day with an image that I thought was going to be the image of the day, which was Senator Ted Cruz when he stood up to object at first, and he got a standing ovation from several Republicans in the House chamber, and that's when the entire process started. It was just before the protest really took off. And it's incredible what's unfolded over the last 4 or 5 hours. And I have to think the Republican senators, the Republican members of the House that were going to object to this Electoral College votes had no idea it was going to get this bad. Maybe some of them truly felt that there were inaccuracies in the elections, even though the courts have completely tossed any of that evidence out. There's been no evidence provided so far. But I wonder how much of this was politics being played. And because of that game, this is where we are right now.
Tom Yamas, Mary Bruce, it does appear that all the members of Congress we've spoken with are determined to. Excuse me, we lost Mary Bruce. I want to bring this to Rick Klein then, and said they do seem determined to get this done tonight for both symbolic and substantive reasons.
Yeah, I think there's a growing consensus among Democrats and Republicans that it's important to send that message, that the process goes on, that there was a political component to today's events. It was meant to disrupt the counting of electoral votes, and I think it's important for the senators and for the House members to be able to resume that count. We just saw a statement from Senator Mitt Romney, who, of course, thought none of this should be happening in the first place. He's calling for all those objections to be dropped, to make something close to unanimous, and we've been hearing from senators that they may at least drop some of the objections, curtail what would have been a long process anyway. In another world where this didn't happen, we'd still be going through those objections and might do it into the wee hours of tomorrow morning. Instead, I think there's going to be probably less debate around that. I have a hard time imagining everyone drops all the objections, but that sure would send a strong statement, given how the president continues to hang on to these false theories.
Let me bring that to Sarah Fagan. Sarah, we are seeing more Republicans stepping up, including, Cecilia was reading the remarkable statement, the strong statement from former President George W. Bush, who, of course, you worked for as well. Based on what you've been hearing today, do you think this scaling back of the objections is going to actually occur? And do you think this has actually changed the minds and hearts of those who in the past have supported the president?
I don't know how it couldn't. This is a remarkably different situation than we were in 3 days ago. A person was shot today. People stormed the Capitol. They sat in the speaker's chair. I think the prudent thing for Republicans to do to make a statement would be to withdraw those objections. I understand the concerns. I share some of them. But we're at a very different place here, and that is the responsible thing for Republican members of Congress to do. I don't think they will all do it. Some of them are going to move forward. They're going to separate these actions from objections to the election process. But more and more senior Republicans, like my former boss, who you just mentioned, are going to come out with incredibly strong statements. This is not reflective of the Republican Party. It's not. Republican Party is a big tent. It's dominated by Trumpism right now. But it is certainly, I don't think any of us look at this and say that we want anything to do with this, anything at all.
But hasn't the story of the last 4 years been that this is Trump's Republican Party?
Well, I mean, certainly he remains the leader as the president, and he is certainly the dominant force of it. And, you know, we're at this critical period in the party, and where it goes remains to be seen. I think that the president did himself and his movement an incredible amount of harm today. You know, whether this is an inflection point and more mainstream Republicans sort of take bigger roles in the party or not, I think remains to be seen. But I think most Republicans, including many Trump supporters and many strong Trump supporters, look at this and say they want nothing to do with this kind of behavior. It's not reflective of who they are. They have very strong views, but that doesn't mean that they want to see violence or people storming the U.S. Capitol.
Sarah Fagan, thanks. Let me bring that to Heidi Heitkamp. You served in the Senate, of course, as a Democratic senator from North Dakota. Is this an inflection point? Is this something on a par with what we saw at 9/11, this attack on the Capitol that will lead, at least for a time, to some unity?
Well, you heard Joe Manchin talk about that this is an opportunity for unity, and that when they all huddled together, they had an opportunity to visit. And I think that speaks well to kind of the camaraderie that people feel about going forward. And so hopefully this will, in fact, lead to some kind of healing of divisions.
We can only hope that, but it comes on the heels, Tom Yamas, of some very sad news. We've learned that the woman who was shot at the Capitol has died.
Yeah, maybe the most horrific image we've seen so far unfold today. A woman shot in the neck. We saw first responders trying to give her CPR, putting their hands on her neck wound. We've just learned that she has died. And, George, we don't even know her name yet. We just know that she died in this senseless violence. And we have to ask ourselves, what did she die for? We don't even know, you know? We don't even know her name, and yet this woman has died. So this has gone way beyond just a simple protest. This was a riot through and through, senseless violence, and now a woman is dead.
A deadly riot. Mary Bruce on Capitol Hill has had to have shaken, and we've heard it in their voices all day long. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, the events of this day.
It absolutely has shaken them to the core, I think, because, of course, this goes way beyond politics and way beyond the usual bitter partisanship that has become, unfortunately, all too commonplace in Washington. To think that right now you have members of Congress huddled in a secure location on the Capitol, talking amongst themselves, trying to figure out where do we as a country go from here. A day that was expected to be a lot of political performance, a day that was going to expose a lot of divisions within the Republican Party, is now sparking a much different conversation and how the country can somehow try and heal going forward. We have heard increasingly tense comments coming from Republicans directed towards the president. The number 3 House Republican, Liz Cheney, in an interview came out and said that the president lit the fire behind what we have seen here today, recognizing that rhetoric has real consequences here. We heard Joe Biden, of course, in a not so veiled way, make it very clear that he felt the president was responsible because the president's words have meaning and can often, be interpreted in many different kinds of ways. And of course, the president himself still not forcefully calling all of this off. It is just remarkable, and I think it is leading to a lot of deep conversations right now on Capitol Hill. First and foremost, over what comes next with the task that was ahead of them today. We had seen so many Republicans lining up behind the president, fruitlessly backing this effort to try and object to the election results that, of course, wasn't going to change anything. And now a sense that there is growing pressure on many of these members and that some may be backpedaling, maybe reconsidering, given what we have seen today, that it simply isn't worth it to stand behind the president and object to these results, given what that conversation clearly has sparked.
Mary Bruce, thanks very much. That's how it's being processed inside the Capitol right now. Terry Moran, what we can't know yet, this has all been unfolding in real time all through the day in a way that was actually quite unexpected. What we can't know yet is how the country is going to process all of this.
Well, it's a moment for us all, isn't it? For too long, it's pretty clear that the fundamental question for too many American voters in their politics has not been what do you believe in, but who do you hate? and owning the libs or whatever you want to do to the other side has been the driving force. Donald Trump was made for this moment. He has a personality which is very good at hating and very good at tearing people down. And he lifted people up in some ways because they felt, a champion, an implacable and brutal fighter against a culture that they thought was exterminating them or changing their beloved culture in a way they wouldn't recognize anymore. That is the politics that led to this moment. When you heard Joe Manchin talk about the centrist group of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate trying to do business, when you hear about Joe Biden in his very typical way saying, you know, we got to be looking out for each other again. That sounds like a note from a distant past. It is, but it is the kind of antidote that is needed to cure the poison, the toxin, right through our politics, to our dinner table arguments at Thanksgiving and all the rest of it that we've talked about for these years. That must change. We can ask our leaders to do it, but really they won't do it unless we will.
Terry Moran, Mary Alice Parks, record numbers of Americans voted for Joe Biden, record numbers of Americans voted for Donald Trump. A deeply divided country. Biden won by more than 7 million votes overall. And the country often chooses something that they, at some level, is an antidote to the president that came before. The contrast we saw in the two statements today about as stark as can be.
You know, one thing that the president's actions the last few months has done has robbed President-elect Joe Biden of a more fulsome conversation about how he won. And I think that both parties and all voters need to take a moment to think about how it was that Joe Biden motivated people, not only got out a Democratic base, but had a lot of disillusioned Republicans and conservative independents just willing to cross the aisle. You know, we haven't had a meaningful conversation about whether our politics are changed for the good or for the better or for the worse or permanently, or if this is just a moment that is purely reactionary to the president. And I think that in some ways we're going to just be talking about what happened in November for so much longer because of what the president has done. But George, if I may, I have to say I've been just getting so many questions the last few hours. I'm going to really switch gears here. I apologize, but I'm getting so many questions about why it took so long to secure the Capitol. And, you know, we've been talking to Martha about the National Guard, and we've been, you know, talking about to law enforcement about the steps they had to go through to secure a building. But I grew up miles from two military bases where I have seen fighter jets scrambled in minutes. I have seen military in D.C., where, you know, Rick and I live. I've seen military march the streets fast when they have to. And we just didn't see that visibly on TV today. And that was surprising. It was surprising to feel like it took so long. And I think that's something else that we're going to have to be.
In some ways, it's a metaphor for our time. We saw it happening and almost didn't believe it could actually go all the way. They would actually go to the Capitol. They would actually be led in the Capitol. They would actually break through the barricades, and this would all unfold. Not here, not in Washington, D.C., not in the United States of America.
We didn't expect it, and clearly they didn't prepare for it properly.
We're going to take a break right now. I'll be back at 8 o'clock with primetime coverage all through the night with our team. World News Tonight with David Muir is going to air to the whole country right now in this extraordinary day across the country. The U.S. Capitol under siege from rioters incited by President Trump. World News Tonight with David Muir is right now.
Tonight, the horror and chaos and the sadness over what has played out at our nation's capital. Images not seen in modern American history. A mob storming Capitol Hill, the Capitol building under siege. Trump supporters, fueled by the president's own words this morning, smashing through the doors of the U.S. Capitol. Thousands breaching barricades, overwhelming police. All of this as a joint session of Congress was trying to certify President-elect Joe Biden's victory amid growing pressure from President Trump on Vice President Mike Pence. What Pence could be heard saying before being whisked away by the Secret Service. Pence then issuing this statement: the violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop, and it must stop now. The mob pounding on doors, smashing windows, the armed standoff inside the building. police there with guns drawn, trying to hold them back. Members of Congress diving to the floor. A woman shot on Capitol grounds. The images tonight as she is loaded into an ambulance. Rioters making it onto the Senate floor, all the way to the seat of the Senate president. Another seen sitting behind House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk. Republicans and Democrats alike all day calling on the president to urge his supporters to stop after the president told them to march to Capitol Hill. Tonight, the emergency curfew now in effect in Washington, D.C. The entire D.C. National Guard now activated. Troops coming in from Maryland and Virginia. Tear gas deployed late today. Tonight, as authorities try to secure the Capitol, the tough questions already coming in. How was this allowed to happen in the first place, with President Trump for weeks now calling for protests? And after those repeated pleas today to do something, the president late today releasing a 1-minute video, falsely claiming again that he won in a landslide, before then telling supporters to go home. President-elect Joe Biden tonight offering sobering words, saying this was not a protest, this is an insurrection, saying I'm saddened America has come to such a dark moment, saying today this will serve as a reminder that democracy is fragile, but that America will endure. Our entire team standing by. A special edition of World News Tonight begins now.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight on this very difficult day in America. It is hard to put into words what exactly we witnessed today because we've not seen this before. Thousands storming the Capitol after a rally with President Trump, during which he urged them to march on the Capitol, where a joint session of Congress was debating and working to certify the election as our democracy dictates. Instead, they were halted by protesters who smashed through the doors, broke their way into the Capitol, making it to the Senate chamber, and throughout the Capitol, overwhelming police. Lawmakers diving for cover, told to shelter in place, the country watching, the world watching what America looked like today. The mob storming the barriers, pushing through this door, Capitol Police unable to hold them back. Others smashing through windows at the Capitol. There were so many chaotic moments, the tense interactions with Capitol Police overwhelmed, members of Congress and their staffs rushing for cover, reporters told not to reveal their whereabouts. This image tonight of a man walking through Statuary Hall carrying a Confederate flag. Another startling image from inside the office of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Some trying to breach the House chamber, armed security barricading the door, keeping them out. Behind them, members were taking shelter, some of them on the floor, some told to grab their gas masks to protect against tear gas. In an empty Senate chamber, this Trump supporter at the front of the chamber declaring Donald Trump won that election. The march to the Capitol following those words from President Trump, speaking to his supporters, who he invited to Washington, saying you have to show strength, telling them to march to the Hill. And as nightfall approached tonight, the heavy presence, the National Guard joining local police and the FBI, the curfew now in effect. And of course, so many questions tonight. How was this allowed to happen? Where was the security? With the president encouraging these protests for weeks now. We're going to begin tonight with our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl.
Chaos and lawlessness striking at the heart of American democracy, breaking out after the President of the United States urged an angry mob of his own supporters to confront members of Congress and even his own vice president, who were preparing to certify the election. They stormed the Capitol, clashing with police, breaking windows, scaling the scaffolding, fights breaking out in restricted areas of the building, officers outnumbered. In the House chamber, lawmakers dove for cover beneath their desks. Agents with guns drawn, their fingers on the trigger, guarding the barricaded door.
We're being instructed to each of us get gas masks that are under our seats.
The demonstrators, some in tactical gear, were urged to go to the Capitol by the president himself.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Donald Trump lost the election by more than 7 million votes. His lawsuits were rejected by dozens of judges. But still, he told his followers that the election was rigged. And he demanded that his vice president reject the electoral votes and overturn the election in Congress today.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us, and if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
But finally, after more than 4 years of unfailing loyalty, Mike Pence broke with Donald Trump. The moment caught on a hot mic.
Is my statement out?
Yes, sir, it is.
Pence's statement was blunt. I do not believe that the founders of our country intended to invest the vice president with unilateral authority to decide which electoral votes should be counted. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell broke with the president, too, telling his sharply divided Republican colleagues that this election must stand.
The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever. Our democracy would enter a death spiral.
McConnell was blunt. The president did not come close to proving his false claims, he said, and he sharply criticized the 13 Republican senators who planned to challenge the election results.
It would be unfair and wrong to disenfranchise American voters and overrule the courts and the states on this extraordinarily thin basis. And I will not pretend such a vote would be a harmless protest gesture while relying on others to do the right thing.
One of those 13 senators, Ted Cruz of Texas, tried to make his case.
I am not arguing for setting aside the result of this election. We appoint an electoral commission to conduct a 10-day emergency audit, consider the evidence, and resolve the claims.
But there have already been audits and recounts and more than 30 court cases thrown out. The president's own attorney general said there was no evidence of substantial fraud. And minutes after Cruz spoke, the bedlam broke out in the Capitol. Pence was whisked to safety by the Secret Service. The building went into lockdown, but protesters were already inside, marching through Statuary Hall. One man carried a large Confederate flag just outside the Senate chamber, and inside another took to the podium himself to declare Trump had